Welcome to Happy Times and Places, and this is an omnibus edition for a story used to its own omnibus editions, but I can't say whether or not this one is special. Nonetheless, it's a podcast in which I, Toby Haydock, watch a Doctor Who story chosen by a friend of mine, and I commentate along and drop in facts and observations, and then try to guess what my special guest's favourite thing about each episode might be.
Hey, hello Haydocklings. My name's Allan Lear, and I'm sort of an improv comedian and generally just a friend of Toby's. And he's asked me to come along and have a word with you about one of my favourite episodes of Doctor Who for this new podcast that he's doing. Well, I didn't have to think twice about my choice. One of my absolute favourites is The Curse of Fenric, because Sylvester McCoy was my Doctor growing up, and The Curse of Fenric really stuck in my mind. It terrified me at the time, and I rewatched it recently for this, and it really does stand up, I think, exceptionally well. For a Doctor Who from that period. So I'm just going to give you a little rundown of some of my favourite things about it.
Hello everybody, and welcome to this edition of Happy Times and Places, as Alan says there, this new podcast of Toby's. That's how early I asked Alan, who is the husband, is it the first husband and wife team we've had, do this, because Erica Lear, who is his wife, chose The Curse of Fenric a while ago. I mean, both of them did this a while ago. As Alan said, it was when this was a new podcast. So I think he did this kind of podcast sight unseen, or, hearing unheard, because this was very early. I have to say, I was slightly disappointed with Erica and Alan, because they both chose absolute classics. Do you know what I mean? I was quite funky with my friends, going, oh yeah, John Cooper's chosen Time Flight, and John Turner's chosen Battlefield. These are some of the early ones. And then Alan and Erica come straight with Caves Ranzani, Curse of Fenric, bona fide classics. Which is maybe why I've made them wait to do these. Alan undersells himself, actually. He's an excellent improv comic. I have actually seen him save a night that involved the comedian Tony Sattery, who I was, delighted to work with, and a real pleasure to have under the roof of my comedy club. But Alan was very much the guiding force, the sort of unsung hero on the stage, who often, not only had an eye on being funny, but had an eye on making sure that the night steered in the right direction, and with improv, getting audience suggestions and all that, and sort of filtering that, and keeping the show going when it threatened to get wayward and stuff. And he controlled Tony Slattery's talent, shall we say. So I was very impressed with that. And Alan and I go back a long way, and we speak the same language and have often done so. And he's helped me in the past and is a good egg, and actually is currently been doing so. Actually, long after he recorded this, been going through my Quatermass books with a fine tooth comb, and pointing out typos, bad grammar, etc., etc. He's been proofreading for me, basically, as a favour, and doing a really good job of it. So I'm very grateful to Alan. If you ever need a proofreader, I can thoroughly recommend Alan. He does it quickly but very well, and doesn't leave a stone unturned, or a comma unspaced, or whatever. And he's chosen The Curse of Fenric, a story that I was obsessed with as a youth. I spent a lot of my time, I've said this before, as a teenager, being very cross with Doctor Who, and always thinking it was better in the old days, etc., etc. But this was a story I loved. I loved so much, I wrote my own film version of it without the Doctor and Ace. I created these other characters, and we were going to do it because we didn't live by the coast, but there was a river in Ludlow where we could have doubled up as a sort of inlet, and all of that, and I think I accounted for that in the script. And I was going to get all my mates to do it, and yes. I mean, I was forever doing that. I'm sure there are people who design album covers for their band without actually writing a song. I was very much like that. It was the sort of fun was in the planning of it, without actually doing any of the the practical making of the artistic stuff. But we I'd cast all my friends in it, and yeah, it's all very exciting. But we just never did sourced some of the costumes because I had a mate who could had some second-hand military costumes, so we got I got a couple of the Russian bits, and then we had a school trip to Russia as well. Well, anyway, I'm sure I will get into all of that, but I was obsessed with this story. I watched it over and over again. I mean, I could have probably quoted it line by line. So I'm going to have no trouble loving this. I suspect it won't be a disappointment. Haven't watched it for ages, actually. Speaking now, I think perhaps I should have watched it for fun before doing this. But never mind. We're gonna go for episode 1, and I'm doing the as broadcast version, I believe, of the Curse of Fenric. So I might get to do other versions of this down the line as extras or bonuses or alternatives. But we're gonna go with the ads broadcast because there are many different versions of the Curse of Fenric. But the one I know best is the one that was broadcast on the television on the 25th of October, 1989. So with that in mind, shall we go for episode 1 of the Curse of Fenric in 3, 2, 1. I'd actually I'd met Sylvester McCoy. Some friends of mine had organised some sort of pick-up litter campaign or something in Wolverhampton, and we got to chaperone Sylvester McCoy for that day, and he turned up in costume. I do have a photo. He turned up in costume, and it's one of the few photos of my Doctor Who scarf that got eaten by moths that still exist. And he'd said, oh, this one, The Curse of Fenric, we're trying to get it to go out as 5 episodes because there's so much material. So and I remember asking, is Dinsdale Landon the lead, the guest, the main guest star? Because I'd read about Dinsdale Landon being in it, and I don't think I actually knew who he was, which almost gave him even more kudos. It's all right to be an actor I've heard of, but to be an actor with a name like Dinsdale Landon, I think I'd got an inkling that he was a famous actor, but I don't think I knew him for anything. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself, but I was sort of geared up that this story might be pretty cool. A war setting is always great. Doctor Who with soldiers was always very exciting to me. I love the fact that they're speaking in Russia and we've got subtitles. But I was always disappointed with those subtitles. I was like, why have they got sort of dot matrix, big, slightly childish subtitles? Why have they not just gone for normal subtitles? It was almost like going, yes, we're in a program that children watch, so we have to make the subtitles a bit sort of big and basic and childish. And I think on the special edition they just make them normal subtitles, which is quite right, because it's one of the few things I don't like is the subtitles in this. But even though I love the fact that they start speaking in Russian, and because there's so much in this, it's really brisk. Love that opening scene with the Doctor and Ace, and the way it stops on McCoy looking around as if there's something up. I love this incidental music. I adored the fact that it was Russians. I got really into Russia. I'd just been to see a Chekhov play. Stop. At Stratford upon Avon, and I'd the only Chekhov I knew was the guy from the Starship Enterprise, ha ha ha. But I my first proper girlfriend, really, her family, and I think that I didn't think they really approved of me because they were aspirational, and anyway, let's not get into that. But they took me to see The Seagull by Anton Chekhov at Stratford, and I absolutely loved it. Christian Anholt went on to be in loads, had a great career for a bit. I met him recently. He's quite muscly and good looking. Son of Tony Anholt, who was in Howard's Way and Space 1999 and stuff, and coffee adverts. But Christian Anholt was a bit of a film star. and I like this, but I always think this is an odd point to tell. I buy that we've got to speak in English because of the mission, and it actually becomes quite important, and it means you don't have to have subtitles for the whole thing. But it is a bit odd that Prozorov's sort of run up from the beach and obviously said something like, something's going down on the beach, and he's gone, no, do it again, but this time in English. I could understand if it was a bit later and he sort of gone, the moon is drawing, and he goes, yeah, okay, now we have to speak in English, but sort of in the middle of a kind of, there's a disaster. Yes, wait, I am not going to do anything, Sergeant Prozorov, until you start speaking in English. The pacing of this is superb. Anne Reid, what a sign that how an actor's career can go, because she's done loads at this point, but it's not. But when she comes back to Doctor Who, she's the guest lead. It's very much a supporting part, Nurse Crane. I mean, it's a good supporting part because it's a good script, and pretty much all of the parts are good. This is again the lick that this goes at, the fact that it dispenses with sort of all of the nonsense. I do like the flourish of the Doctor signing both of the bits of paper, and I love the thing that Ace understands, that shows how technology improves. What she learned about in school is high end stuff for Dr. Judson, who's a wheelchair user, not an actor who's a wheelchair user, because he does have to stand up later. I think he's wonderful, Dinsdale Landon. Stephen Rimkus, another actor who at this time suddenly started doing everything. He's in I was very surprised to discover he's very Scottish. He was in a thing called Conquest of the South Pole not long after, which was a South Pole, North Pole, which was a movie, I think, based on a play set in a sort of rough housing estate where they a load of people on the fringes of society recreated the conquest of the pole. But he was also in Prick Up Your Ears, and he was in a production of Elidor, and when he was in The Bill, he did a really good one where he was a policeman who'd gone undercover as a football hooligan, and it felt like Doctor Who was lucky to get him, really, because he was doing other bigger stuff around this. It's still a decent part in this, but it's he had better parts. But again, he's another one that, well, he kind of then has kind of receded into the distance a bit like Christian Anholt. They both went on to flourish for 10 years or so, but I think have not had such a good time of it latterly. It's a cruel business. Whereas this guy, Mark Conrad, as Petrosian, I don't think has done much else at all. We haven't seen much of him. Love Tomek Bork as Captain Sorin, and of course, I actually even like these two guys. The guy on the beach, Gaev, with his scratches on his neck, and this underwater shooting is excellent. There's so much that's great about this. I think this the scene where Petrosian runs away in a moment is slightly awkward, just because of the way that it's shot. His run looks slightly comical. There are two or three tiny bits that I'm sure I will mention, because they always slightly worried me, because again, I wanted to show this to people to show how brilliant Doctor Who was these days, because I as I say, I absolutely loved this. And I remember being furious because this to me was the best Doctor Who episode in ages. I'd like Ghostlight, but I had found it a bit too confusing for the modern audience, as it were. But this, I thought, everyone would love. And for the trailer, they showed this bit, and it's like, I mean, come on! Of all the bits you could show in this really exciting episode, you show that sort of slightly comical exchange. I just think that the angle that this is shot at makes his run away look slightly comical. I don't think it's his fault. It's just one of those things. But it's so tight, isn't it? And then you've got the Doctor wandering around being mysterious, which is great. I mean, Perkins is all set up for somebody to either do something heroic in Part 4 or die horribly in Part 4. And actually, you just don't see him in Part 4, but we'll get to that. Eyes watching. I mean, this hasn't let up at all. There is a bit, isn't it, when Is it when Sylvester McCoy's just signed the 2 bits of paper and he goes, Dr. Judson's work at translating the German ciphers is very important. And the way that he does it suggests is something I've observed with Sylvester McCoy, is that he's not always on top of his lines, and he will sometimes say a sentence in a way. He will stress words just to buy him a little bit of time to get the rest of the sentence in his head. And I think that Dr. Judson's work in translating the German ciphers is very important to the raw effort, is one way you can see that the rhythm is dictated by his memory. Janet Henfrey, who turned up in Mummy on the Orient Express, she's a lovely woman. She's one of those actresses that has always sort of played, sort of similar. She played quite a lot of similar parts. She's obviously teachers in 2 of the Dennis Potters. She's a very good actress, stalwart. And Joanne Kenny and Joanne Bell. Joanne Kenny, who I'd forgot, I didn't instantly recognise, was in Grange Hill. And he's now sadly no longer with us, died rather young. I love this scene, and having watched the special edition, I think, again, it's truncated from a slightly longer sequence, but there's something so enigmatic and weird about this. And I know there's they cheat, don't they, slightly, because naval officers weren't allowed facial hair, but they wanted the Hitler look. And I love the way he sort of comes out of his reverie, Alfred Lynch as Millington, and the sort of, even the way that he holds his wrist and then holds his finger in his hand and contemplates the chess with Mark Ayres' excellent score. For a scene with no dialogue that is just there to establish this slightly strange character of Commander Millington, I love that scene. I don't know why, it's one of my favourite scenes in Doctor Who, and I don't quite know why. I just think it's beautifully evocative. Not to mention Nicholas. I remember being furious that Nicholas Parsons had been cast in Doctor Who, and he's absolutely fantastic in this. And again, look at that on the neck, vampiric, and the body's kind of white and drained, which is very good. And I remember there was an early clip that I caught, in a trailer for forthcoming season, and it had, Sylvester McCoy and Nicholas Parsons, and it's the bit where, he says to the Doctor, "I'm afraid I don't understand," and the Doctor says, "Afraid, yes, but of what?" And in isolation, I wasn't convinced by Parsons, and I thought, oh God, is he going to be a bit limp and a bit wooden? He's absolutely brilliant in this, and I hats off to John Nathan Turner, because it was the sort of casting that would kind of get attention. It was also, though, the sort of casting that would annoy people like me who wanted Doctor Who to be taken very, very seriously. But I have to say, there is something good about seeing. Now, I know William Gaunt is a very, serious classical actor and always has been, but he was very well known for the sitcom No Place Like Home. So seeing him as Orsini and seeing my brothers and sisters going, "Oh yeah, he's that guy from that." Wow, and seeing Nicholas Parsons, it's like when Bob Monkhouse did a straight performance in something, I can't remember what now, and because you're used to seeing somebody being funny all the time, seeing them actually turn up and deliver the business, and Parsons really does in this, gives something an extra quality to it. That's why it's always nice to see actors that doing something different, especially if they are so convincing at doing something different, which is why we don't always like seeing people we don't know in stuff. There is a reason people use names, is because we quite enjoy watching the craft of acting. And that's something that's, there's a lot of debate about at the moment, because we even now had recently Michael Sheen saying, he didn't, and the press spun it. He wasn't making a demand, but he was saying, he wasn't always over the moon when non-Welsh actors played Welsh. And actually the art of the character actor, I do enjoy watching, but I do understand, authenticity and lived experience as well. But I think great actors, great craftspeople, I always say a good actor, don't cast a bus driver as the bus driver, cast an actor as the bus driver, because a good actor knows more about the bus driver than a bus driver knows about himself. A good actor has to be a good, psychoanalyst, or also has to be able to transmit something about the character's thoughts that the character themselves doesn't actually understand or know they're transmitting. There is a craft to acting. There's, and as I say, not everyone is a technical actor. Some people just have the skill of doing that instinctively, or or that they convey it because they're very good at having their thoughts show in their face without actually doing anything, and that can be an innate talent. But also, craft. Oh, I've just seen somebody coming out of the sea. I have never seen that before. I've got it on a big screen, just in the corner where. When McCoy was talking to Ace there, I just saw somebody popping out of the sea. Never seen that before. But again, they're zipping about all over the place, and I don't think it harms this at all. I think it really keeps the story going. Now, Alfred Lynch, I didn't think I knew, but I had actually seen the film The Hill, which my brother had got out when we rented a video machine for about a month before, and then I think my brother didn't pay for it, and so then they came and got it back. And he hired out a movie called The Hill with Sean Connery. And Alfred Lynch is the sort of weedy soldier that is bullied by Ian Hendry and Harry Andrews. And it's a wonderful film, The Hill. Stark, black and white, directed by Sidney Lumet. Lots of characters getting sweaty and cross with each other in a military prison. And Sean Connery, showing outside of Bond, his acting mettle. I love Dinsdale Landon. It's a great character performance, and Lynch has Landon's doing lots of sort of that Clive Merrison description of vivid acting, which I have no problem with, especially when you're playing a mad scientist who's a wheelchair user. But there's a lovely sort of broken quality to Lynch. I know some people find it odd because he has that slightly slurred delivery, almost like he's got a slight Bell's palsy or a slight stroke or something. Interestingly, he was caring for his partner who had a stroke in many later years, because his partner's James Culliford, who is in the first 2 episodes of Frontier in Space, whose last job that was, who I think had a stroke at around the time that it was going out, and Alfie Lynch, as he was known to his friends, cared for Culliford. I think they lived in Brighton. I think they were mates of John Nathan Turner. So I didn't think I knew Lynch. And again, that gave him a certain quality in my eyes, because, if they were casting, actors in lead roles and I'd not really heard of them, I felt that was a shortcoming on my part. And then, of course, I did a little delving and realised, actually, I had seen him in The Hill, and then he'd done he'd had leads in movies. He'd done another one with Sean Connery, and Landon had this great theatrical pedigree. So I felt I was being educated by Doctor Who. And I think it's lovely casting. Some, as I say, some don't get on with Alfred Lynch, but I think he's wonderful. I think you could go for a sort of gruff, barky military type, but I think his slightly watery eyes. He always had that slightly droopy physiognomy, like he was sort of made of clay and had been rained on, or just cried, and his in his so there's a sort of forlorn aspect to him, slightly broken man, which sort of ties in with that subtext that they have of him and Judson, which I know then comes out in the book, and the various so many iterations. I remember being so excited about the book because that was going to expand this, because there is so much that had either been cut or had to be done briefly. It's a story that earns a further delve or allows you to fill in blanks if you want to, and so it made it a very rewarding experience reviewing it, thinking about filling in those blanks or anticipating the book to see if it did. The book changed the names of some of the Russians. Prozorov becomes Trofimov, doesn't he? But what I knew that probably a lot of my friends didn't know, which made me feel very special. But having gone to see the Seagull at Stratford, Jane Russell, and I didn't know about drawing on the back of a leg to show that you've got stockings. Anyway, is that all the Russian soldiers are named after characters in Chekhov plays. So Sorin is in The Seagull. Petrosian, he's in one of them, Three Sisters. Andrei Prozorov is in Three Sisters, but Trofimov is in Cherry Orchard. And this is Peter Tchaikovsky as Prozorov, who went to Manchester University, not with Sophie Aldred, I think, or certainly at around that time, which is and did the course that I ended up doing not that long afterwards. So this was such a special story to me. I used to love it when things like that happen. I've always felt a kind of affinity with it. Gaev is also in Czech. Even the non-speaking guy, Gaev's in Cherry Orchard. And again, I think some of this is in the script, but I know that the brevity, the truncation means we get sort of voiceover bits. Love the dead Russian under the sea. That just felt really kind of sort of grown up stuff, the sort of stuff we hadn't really seen in Doctor Who for a while. So it's got some real sort of horror movie stuff. I like the way they sort of they do that sort of bicker with it. And Corey Pullman, I think, is great. Kathleen is a really convincing character. That yes, there is she has whipped up a time storm and got a Super Ted teddy bear and whipped it back to World War II. And of course, yes. So this is the baby is her mum. The baby. I was in fact I was emailing somebody emailing back and forth. People have tracked down this baby because the baby gets a credit, and of course this baby is now 150 years old. Oh, poor old Ace. It was brave of them to do this kind of subject matter for. I mean, it's a bit embarrassing, that, Ace. I mean, you could have pretended. But it's very brave of them to do this story of, this emotionally damaged teenager who had a bad relationship with her mother, and to thread it through as a sort of as a sort of story arc within Doctor Who is quite advanced and I think quite brave. Another excellent scene. Again, just and the whole baby thing gives us that lovely stuff about the social mores later on. But we'll talk about that when we get to it. Doctor and Ace do have sort of free reign to just sort of wander around, don't they? But no, I think this has everything in it. It's got, I think, the World War II setting is really helpful. This is brilliant. It actually turns out to just be a thing that's not actually that relevant to the plot. That he's trying to think the way the Germans think, but it means we get that brilliant establishing scene, and it just makes it very atmospheric and a bit oppressive and a bit scary. And again, Doctor Who. It seems odd now that Doctor Who didn't do World War II as often as maybe one might think it would have done, because it's a great setting. But I remember feeling that it was extremely refreshing to have Russians rather than Germans in it. It just made it again feel a bit less obvious, a bit more grown up. And I remember learning all of the Russian dialogue and being an idiot with it. Anyway, I think I've got to be saying it out loud into a video camera at a party once, because I don't know, I thought I was speaking Russian, man. But we did go to Russia. We had a school trip to Russia. I love the way that he does this. And of course, anything, I'm a sucker. I'm a big Nigel Neal fan. But Nigel Neal's not the only person that does it. Anything that has an ancient text that a good actor can read out and be a bit spooked by, because it's ancient. Anything that is ancient, anything that is old, anything that is musty brings with it death, the passage of time, the undead, skeletons, cobwebs, and really helps. And then you've got the sort of warlike setting as well, which is terrific. And this beach is great, isn't it, with all the white rocks, and having it set by the sea as well, which of course later gives us monsters rising from the sea. It's got it all. vampires, soldiers, ancient texts, and a cliffhanger with guns being pointed at the Doctor and Ace, which is, you know, a fairly standard and not amazing cliffhanger, but it doesn't really matter because you kind of go, I've just had a totally satisfying episode of Doctor Who. It's got it all. You know, the mystery, what are the Russians up to? It's got those great characters on the camp. It had the nighttime atmosphere. And it's, you know, it's quite rich in what it's trying to do. I don't think the two, Jean and Phyllis, are I mean, they're hard parts to play, and I don't think, they're one of the sort of least satisfying elements for me, and it's a shame because I remember Joanne Kenny very fondly from Grange Hill, and I'm sorry that she died, you know, so young. But having those characters and having, you know, a nod towards, you know, femininity and maybe bubbling sexuality and having something, you know, to, you know, mirror, you know, Ace, what she represents, and Kathleen and motherhood and blah, 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 blah. You know, I think it's a brave attempt to throw all of that into the mix amongst a, you know, to use a phrase, boy's own adventure that has, as I say, the refreshing element of Russian rather than German, and to have the ancient stone stuff and the, you know, the Viking ghost story element. You know, it's a fusion of lots of marvelous things, and obviously quite a stuffed and dense text that has been pared to the bone, which means we get those lovely voiceovers over other scenes going on, which means we don't see people leaving one place and arriving at another. They're there. They deliver the important stuff. McCoy says something brooding and looks out into the distance and buggers off somewhere else to go and ask somebody something else. It's lovely. It's lovely. And Mark Ayres' music is, you know, is an undercurrent, but it's got a military thing going on as well. But there's the nighttime scariness. I think it's, and this is the guy that directed The Mysterious Planet and Paradise Towers. And I think his pacing, his framing, his use of atmosphere, his casting is all bang on, Nicholas Mallet. Well done. And, you know, Ian Briggs' script has everything you could possibly want. So, my goodness, it is a very, very, very good and a very, very satisfying episode of Doctor Who. Don't write in, by the way, if I've got some of the. I should have checked if I'd wanted to show off some. I mean, when was this on? Do that. I mean, 30 odd years ago. So that's when I was well into the Chekhovs. I mean, I've seen many of them many times since. I love the Seagull. That production of the Seagull I saw, by the way, had an actor I'd never heard of in the lead. Constantine was played by Simon Russell Beale, and Nina by Amanda Root. I've since been stared at her to read through at the Forsyte saga. She didn't smile back. But in that production, Alfred Burke was Sorin. Sabriakov was played by Trevor Martin. I saw Doctor Who on stage. I got to know Trevor a bit later. Jakob was played, who's got 3 lines, one of which is, "Can we go for a swim, sir?" was Arnold Yarrow. I've seen Belial on stage. And he's still with us, whereas Trevor, sadly, is not. Alfred Burke is not. Trigorin was Roger Allam. There's an actor who should have been in Doctor Who. Arkadina was Susan Fleetwood. She was a magnificent actress who died far too young. She was amazing in that. They were all brilliant. Oh, and Katie Behan, who sadly died very tragically, was a great classical actress of that time. Graham Turner, who since turned up in Doctor Who. In the Scarlet Death one, and yeah, it was an absolutely top-notch cast. John Carlyle, who was marvelous as Dr. Dawn. Why am I talking about that production of The Seagull? Because yes, so just if if I've stuck Gaev and Trofimov and Prozorov in the wrong place, don't write in, because as soon as I've done here, I'm going to go and check to remind myself, because I read and reread those Chekhov plays because they chimed with the Doctor Who. I mean, it was exactly the same time that this was happening. As this was going out, or as this was about to go out, I can't remember the exact timings. I was at Stratford watching this thing, and then I was flicking through Chekhov and noticing the names were the same as the names in the Doctor Who. So, of course, then I read the plays, because why would you not read the plays that have got characters named after characters in a Doctor Who story that you're absolutely loving? So, my education, where I read and reread, the major plays of Chekhov and some of his short stories, and then I think I chose to study them at university as well, when there was a module on Chekhov and Ibsen, and so I dived into all of that. But I mean, a lot of people do it because they're drawn to the Russian sensibility, or they love the sad humour of Chekhov's pieces, or the flawed characters that he writes so well, or his great skill and aptitude for capturing the sort of small, pathetic nature of man that leads to great individual tragedy, and juxtaposing the sort of small empty lives with the great loss that we feel when they are so empty. But that speaks to many people on a number of different levels of identification and emotion, and wonderful psychological insight, or greater comment about the tragicomic nature and futility of existence. And I did it because a lot of the characters got the same names as some Russian soldiers in the Curse of Fenric. I've never pretended to be an intellectual. So good old Anton Chekhov. Yeah, good old the non-Star Trek Chekhov. And that's, I think, going to be... I do love that scene of Millington. Well, I mean, if I'm going to choose my favourite thing, I know what I'm going to choose. And I think I knew pretty much going into this. But I'm still resting, because I love that scene of Millington, that establishing scene. I don't know why. It just speaks to me. It's the economy, the performance, the music, the cutting. It's just subtle and evocative. I love that establishing scene of Millington. I think it just really works. I love all the characters. I love the brooding, moody atmosphere. I love the lick that it goes at. I think the pacing of it is excellent. I think everyone in it is great. I love the World War II setting. So much of this is good. But I think I can't not choose that my favourite thing in episode 1, and because I think it affects the whole atmosphere and tone of the story, is the Russian soldiers, is the Russian element. It just seems so exciting and different and grown up for it not to be Germans. And of course that comes later important to the plot. But so it meant that we'd got a World War II, and World War II stories were so familiar for all the war films and Commando mags and all that sort of thing that I was growing up with. But to have World War II in Doctor Who seemed quite thrilling and exciting and obvious. And yet, hang on, but we don't. We don't have it except for no, because the War Games is World War I. So it seemed really odd. It seemed sort of long overdue. But then to not go the obvious route and do the, well, I suppose do the Churchill and all of that, and because it's had the personal element of the Chekhov thing, which was just perfectly timed for me to be doing Chekhov at college. It just seemed like Doctor Who was talking to me, and it's strange. And I know I'm not unique in this. We all have our own, versions of somehow. That there was something happening with a Doctor Who story that reflected something in my life, or there was a reference, or somebody I knew ended up being. We all have that thing where Doctor Who suddenly seems like it's weaving very specially into our lives, and I certainly feel that it's done that frequently. on a number of occasions under lots of different circumstances, and this was one of them where my love and obsession for this Doctor Who story tied in with an obsession I had with Chekhov plays, which were part of my theatre studies education that I was doing at college. And college, they had the collected works of Chekhov, so I took them out voluntarily and read them, and so it helped me with my course with doing drama, and sort of enabled me to show off as well, because I was well read, because I'd read the Cherry Orchard and Three Sisters, and blah blah blah. What is it with Nell says, I hate those Russian places, all about women staring out windows talking about ducks flying to Moscow. Ha ha! Great line. But I love the Russian. So I am going to choose as my favourite thing for episode 1 of a brilliant episode, a flawless episode, bar the subtitles, which look like they've been printed off one of those printers that would have been at my mum's work, the sort of dot matrix printers. Minus marks for that. You should have just gone for grown-up, normal subtitles. And the way that Petrosian runs and sort of does a sort of... He's not meaning to be comic. It's just a film from an unfortunate angle. And I'm not wild about the Jean and Phyllis and Miss Hardacre, that the realization of that. I know what they're driving at, but I don't think they're 100% successful. But in many Doctor Who stories, those things wouldn't stick out quite so much because they'd be, and perhaps he wouldn't seem as egregious as perhaps they're not, and they wouldn't be in other Doctor Who stories. But just because the quality, just because they're surrounded by so much that is excellent, I acknowledge those bits that don't quite pass muster for me, because again, this is very much me at the time. Always had an eye on people walking in when I'm watching Doctor Who, and I wanted them to walk in, see something amazing, and go, Toby, you're right. Doctor Who is the best program ever. I am now a fan too, and I will be your friend. I brought the videotapes of this season to parties. We'd have drunken parties, and then in the morning we'd get up and I'd put them on, and again hope my friends would kind of really get into it. With this one, I'll talk about what happened with this one later, because it involves a character who we've not really seen, although he does get a credit in this episode, but he's not had any lines. But we'll talk about him later. I think some of you will know to whom I'm alluding, because I think he floats the boats of people who play for every single team. But we'll get into that. But also, I say with a certain amount of shame that I took the videotapes of this season to parties. I sometimes feel, as though I've never quite fitted in and blah, blah, blah. Actually, I've had really good friends at school and at college and at university who've indulged my passion for Doctor Who in a way that I look back at now and go, God, people were nice. God, people were indulgent. And my genuine love for Doctor Who has I think been very much indulged by friends and partners and people in the past in a way that I sometimes think now, I don't know how lucky I was. Anyway, my thing for episode 1 is all the Russianness of the Curse of Fenric. The Russian soldiers, the Russian language, the Russian Chekhovian names. What's Alan's? But with an acknowledgement of that opening scene for for Millington, which I think is gorgeous. Allan Lear, what is your favourite thing about episode 1 of The Curse of Fenric?
Episode 1. Now, for episode 1, it's got to be the setting. The lovingly created interiors with the church and the beautiful realism of the setting there, and more importantly the landscape and the glorious ocean, and there's also the Viking boat is beautifully realised as well, I think. But the whole setting of Curse of Fenric is really effective and atmospheric, and I'm really pleased that they were able to persuade JNT not to go with internal sets for it, but do on location shooting. That was marvellous.
Yes, I mean, I suppose that was a thing I could have guessed that Allan might have gone for, because when you're assessing what you like about a story at entry level, its setting is pretty much, stop one, really, isn't it? But I couldn't betray my Russian boys, but I think the setting is excellent, and yes, the fact that it's shot all on location gives it a sort of convincing continuity. I'm not always wild about all videotape production, but and sometimes I think you can have problems with sort of clumpy sound, or fairly muzzy lighting that's compromised. But I actually think it's it can all look a bit corporate video sometimes. You're fighting space aliens with all the atmosphere of a infomercial for Portaloos. But I think Nick Mallet shoots this well enough, and everybody acts it well enough that it brings you into it, and there's a moody atmosphere to it, as much as can be mustered on stark videotape with a lot of natural lighting. Yeah, the setting is a fair enough choice, but I had to choose my Russian boys, and if I hadn't chosen my Russian boys, I had to choose Commander Millington's opening scene. But I do obviously think the setting is genius, long overdue to set Doctor Who there, and they do enough with the setting to shake it up to make it seem like a fresh and interesting take. World War II plus ancient sea monsters. What's not to love? So much to love about the Curse of Fenric. I know I'm going to enjoy doing this one. There will be no hardship, and it's amazing how well I know it as well. My goodness, I mean, I know it better than obviously. I don't quite remember. I assumed the Chekhov knowledge was residing in the back of my head, but those synapses are obviously fraying a little bit, because I'm sure not that long ago I'd have just gone biff bang biff. But I can still give you the name of every actor in this, so I've retained the important stuff. So so perhaps some of my undercurrents of stop moving. There's nothing there anymore. It's just flat with no activity. There's nothing going on beneath the surface anymore. So none of it works. Anyway, I really enjoyed that. I hope you did too. I hope you loved The Curse of Fenric. I think it's one of Doctor Who's finest. I think it's one of Sylvester McCoy's finest. They're both great in it as well. I love the sort of brooding Doctor who's going from place to place, just saying something spooky and then zipping off somewhere else to say something spooky to someone else. A graveyard. It's got a graveyard. Said it church graveyard. Yeah, said it on a beach. Said it in an army barracks. Said it in a church with a graveyard. These are all great places where terrible things can happen. The sense of the geography chosen. It's very, very clever. Well done, Ian Briggs. Well done, Nick Mallet. Well done, Andrew Cartmel. Well done, Mark Ayres. It's all, and what a cast. It all comes together. So, beautiful. The Curse of Fenric, which I remember was announced as being the Wolves of Fenric, but which I think is a slightly better title. But I can also understand why you would change it, because they're not literal wolves or even werewolves. You'd be watching it and going, apart from the fact you'd be watching it and going, where are the wolves? Anyway, shut up. Actually, I'm not going to entirely shut up just yet, because once this episode was recorded originally and put on Patreon, this isn't a plug, but I'll mention it anyway, patreon.com/Toby Haydock, where you get everything a little bit earlier, and you also get the chance for some feedback. And I'd mused at the thought of getting Andrew Cartmel's contribution, because he's always offered if I want a little bit of extra insight. I don't like to bother people, though. But I mentioned it, and all of the patron feedback said definitely get Andrew on, because he's not on the commentary, and, it's such an important story. So I chanced my arm, and Andrew said yes. So what we're going to do now, because that hadn't been the plan, and I hadn't done that when I recorded the commentary for this episode, is before we draw this particular instalment of this podcast to a close, is that we are going to jump on the ultimate machine, the laptop, and speak to the script editor of The Curse of Fenric, who has a lot of thoughts and insights into this remarkable Doctor Who story. I'd done episode 1 of this, and then I'd said, I remember Andrew saying when we did Dragonfire, if ever I was doing another one, I should let him know. And everyone went, yeah, we really need to hear Andrew on this because he's not on the commentary on the DVD. This is from Jim Smith, who's a very smart chap who's written many a book about Doctor Who. And Jim also says, because I was very positive about episode 1, and I was saying how I love the transmitted version, as much as any other. And he said, lovely to see someone sticking up for the transmitted version of Fenric. Season poll winning it may have been, but the rapid release of the extended VHS and the wonderful expanded novelization saw the original version end up as slightly written off, as, to borrow a phrase, sent into this world scarce half made up. And I really don't think it is. I know Andrew Cartmel now thinks the TX version is as a kind of write-off, but the other versions all contain stuff he missed from the TX. But that's because he's inside the process. From the outside, the original version really worked for me, and it still does. They got it as right as they could under the circumstances, and I think Andrew should be proud of that, he says. So there we go.
Okay, a couple of things there. First of all, what's the source of the quote?
Richard III. I was sent into this world scarce half made up.
That hack Shakespeare strikes again. Okay, so just for anybody who doesn't know, TX means transmission, the transmission version, the version that went out on the telly. Well, he's not wrong in the sense that I can only see it from an insider's point of view. And so it was not a case of retroactively thinking, the long version's better and the transmission version isn't. It was when the transmission version went out, my head was in my hands. Because I knew how great it was, and I knew what would hit the screen just did not work. And I have a very specific and detailed analysis of what the problem is, if you want to hear it. Okay, the problem is there was way too much material. It was too long to go out. Now, there is a school of thought that that's the script editor's problem, but my school of thought is that the director has to time it based on how he knows he's going to shoot it and give it. And if there's some sense that it's going to be too long, let us know and we can fix it. There was none of that. So, Nick Mallett, a terrific director, but whoever on his team, including him, didn't do that is responsible for it being too long. I take no responsibility for that. But the fact is, it was way too long. Now, the way to have fixed that, the way that John Nathan Turner was a brilliant editor, there's a couple of things he was great at, particularly great at, creatively shifting a budget, because he had no money, but he could achieve great things with almost no money. That was one thing. The other thing was he actually had a natural gift for editing, because I sat with him while we edited with the directors there, and John would make suggestions, and they were always terrific suggestions. He could have been an editor. So John was a good editor, but what he did with this was all wrong. There was way too much stuff. So the way that he fixed it was to take a little bit out of everything, like to reduce everything a little bit, which might sound like a good idea, but it was not a good idea, because it ended up nothing, to me, worked. Everything was rushed. There was no breathing space. I felt that you could almost dub in sort of Keystone Cops music over some of it, they're just rushing around back and forth. And it ruined it, frankly. And I thought a lot about this. And the thing to do was not to try and reduce everything by a little bit. It was to lose something, to lose some strand or subplot in its entirety or almost in its entirety, then leave everything else at its current length and let everything else breathe and work. And I've thought about this, and the way to have done that would have been to have lost, if not all, then most of the Nicholas Parsons strand. Now, it's it's a masterpiece, but something's got to go. In my mind, something had to go. And that was the thing that could go without affecting the main thrust of the story. I mean, if you go back and analyze it, if you can come up with something that's a better nomination than that, please tell me. But I think that one would have to be ruthless and just decide that has to hit the cutting room floor. And in a feature film, I think it would have done. Now, it's great stuff, which is one reason John wouldn't have done it. But I think the other reason John would never have countenanced that is because it featured Nicholas Parsons, who was a big name guest star. And John loved his guest stars. He loved him a guest star. And he would never have even considered that. And I never suggested, it's not as though I said this at the time and he ignored it. I didn't even think of it till years later that would have been the way to do it. That would have been the solution. Lose something almost in its entirety or in its entirety and let everything else breathe. So that's what they should have done, something of that nature to Fenric. But doesn't matter, because the transmission version was only one version, it turns out. And then they did the extended cut, and the extended cut just worked. Like when I saw it, I was astonished. And it's not often in life that we get a second chance on these things, because Fenric had been a fantastic script, which had had the great good fortune to be well shot, with a good cast, good director. So good script actually turned into a good TV show, and then destroyed in the editing for reasons of duration, for reasons of making it fit the transmission lengths. But then it came back. I thought that was that. I really thought that was that. Too bad about Fenric was what I thought. And then I saw the extended cut, and I was just so grateful. I mean, thank God that they hadn't recorded snooker over it for a start. All the other, all the extra bits, because that was. I seem to remember that was the standard procedure otherwise. So thank you to everybody who's done that. And if people like the original version, that's even better, because it means there's no bad version really. But from my point of view, that's the way I see it.
Well, there's a lot of love coming for the original version, and there's two things that strike me on that. One, if you had cut the Nicholas Parsons bit, for somebody who spent his entire career encouraging people to consolidate something to just a minute, he wouldn't have been able to have felt too chastened by it. It was all about the consolidation.
What a great thought! I'd completely forgotten that connection. I mean, I knew who he was, but I'd forgotten that you might be able to make that comparison. How lovely.
And the other thing was, I was an angry teenager, and I was convinced Doctor Who was not as good as it used to be, and that and all of that crap that you go through as a teenager, which of course I grew out of. But even at the time, through being that angry teenager and always looking at the things that worried me or I thought were wrong with Doctor Who, The Curse of Fenric catapulted its way into my top 10 and has remained there ever since. And that's in the original version. And I watched and rewatched that original version over and over again, and I still love it. So again, you know what babies were killed, but we never saw them being born. So to use that,
well, no, the thing is, you've seen those babies grow to maturity, because you've seen the long version. The babies that were killed on the TX version, but it's all worked out, which is great. I always see the flaws in these things. The chief hemivore, those costumes aren't great. I mean, I remember Ken True doing the color sketches of them, and they're beautiful, but it's just styrofoam or whatever they make that stuff out of. His jaw doesn't work. I see it flapping around. I felt that the whole, I've always argued this, and John never agreed with me. The way to go with monsters and Doctor Who was pretty much the way the vampire girls are in the ones I've just proposed cutting in the Nicholas Parsons. That was the way to do it, with that long fingernails, scary eyes. As human as possible is my argument. Simply because we couldn't do the guy in the rubber suit very well. I mean, nobody could until Ridley Scott did Alien. Nobody did the guy in the rubber suit at all well, I feel.
No,
let me correct myself. The Destroyer was great. The Destroyer was great in Battlefield.
I like the hemivores, but I think the ones that look a bit more human with the hair are slightly better than the sort of corally monstery ones. So actually the ones that you see a bit less of, when they're rising out from the sea, they're the ones, because they look a bit more like a zombie. They're a bit more of a parody of an undead human than a sort of corally blue monster.
And the aesthetic approach, that they're encrusted like the hull of a ship. I mean, it all makes sense. It just ends up looking like dodgy rubber monsters. And forgive me for saying this. I think the story still works, but I've always had this thing with Doctor Who, that we did great work, but you're walking a tightrope. I remember when we did the press screening of Delta and the Bannermen, which had a lot of great stuff going for it. But I was sitting there beside members of the press, and we'd had this terrible disaster where the makeup crew had basically just gone out in the piss the night before, and the following morning they just decided that the alien was just going to have bits. I've said this elsewhere, but it's still true. He just had bits of cotton wool stuck on his face, dyed green. That was the way the alien. And John came, saw this, blew up, and insisted that they do a better job. But the trouble is, they'd already shot some footage with this ridiculous face. So there I am, cut forward to Fenric. Sorry, I beg your pardon. To Malcolm, so Bannerman being finished, edited, all right, and being shown to the press at big press launch junket. And I'm sitting there, and it's going pretty well. And then we get a shot of this guy with his cotton wool green face beside me. This press woman, this journalist goes, suppressed laughter. And I thought, she's right. She's right. It is laughable, but also, we're from this point on. Can I swear in this podcast?
Yeah.
We're fucked. So from that point on, we were fucked. And we were fucked because somebody just didn't do their job properly. And the trouble with special effects, especially monster effects, and the more ambitious they are, the more alien the creature is, the more exposed you are to somebody just not. And even people who are desperately trying to do a great job might not be able to pull it off for all, because they don't have the time, they don't have the materials, or they perhaps just don't have the aptitude. It's not always neglect or malice. Sometimes people are working their hearts out. This still doesn't work. But this was a problem at the time because we didn't have much of a budget, we didn't have much time, and also special effects were in their infancy. I mean, now presumably on our MacBook Airs, we could create better effects than some of the effects we had in the show at the time. But I think that Fenric survives that. I think all of the Doctor Who stories did survive that, but I'm always wary of showing them to somebody who's not an initiate, who's not an insider, because you might get that first snigger and then they're jolted out of it. And they don't, it's not, it isn't, it shouldn't be the case. That shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't be that it's inevitable that there's going to be something dodgy that's going to jolt people out of the narrative. It was within our ability to do a show where you never had those sniggers. I mean, people could not like it, but they wouldn't have been able to judge it on the basis of just really dodgy effects. So that's just a long diatribe about the way I felt. Don't get me started on the cheetah people in survival.
But I think it behoves us as an audience. I remember a comedian who's not a telly fan at all, called Jeff Innocent, who's a big old Cockney guy. He says, "Oh, you like the old telly, don't you, Toby?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Yeah. What problem with us nowadays is that." Decided that television had to look real all the time. He said, I was brought up on stuff and you knew it wasn't real, but you enjoyed it anyway. And I think what he was trying to say was, you met stuff on its own terms, and it ill behoves you to do otherwise, because all you're doing is going, well, I know that's not real. Well, we know it's not real anyway. It's whether we're prepared to meet something on its own terms and accept what it's trying to do.
What we're talking about there, Toby, is slightly different. We're almost talking about theatre, aren't we? Where you're in the theatre and it's an illusion, and it's an agreed illusion, and you have people with two chairs and a board, and it's supposed to be the Land of Oz, and it can be the Land of Oz if it's well done and if our imaginations are open. But this is a slightly different thing. This is where there's actually an attempt to do an explicit representation of something, and it would have been possible for some television production teams to have achieved that, whereas others didn't. Because I mean, there are things in the Quatermass stories, the early Quatermass serials. It's not consistently great, but when it works, it's sometimes fantastic, right? So it's certainly not inevitable that television in that period had to look dodgy. It was just some kind of failing each time. That's where I stand on it.
Well, let's put the failings to one side. I'm going to take you on a whistle-stop tour, episode by episode. We've been nominating our favourite things about the Curse of Fenric, episode by episode. So episode one.
I nominate my favourite thing.
Yeah, so what's your favourite thing for episode 1?
Well, it's the same for all the episodes. It's Ian Briggs. genius. I mean, it's a really Briggsian story, and everything that we're going to talk about is a consequence of his writing. So that's just, I wanted to say that at the top.
Yes, I mean it's extraordinary that because it's very different from well, I suppose it's not that it's because Dragonfire has the sort of the baddie's a sort of Nazi guy, isn't it? It's all that militaristic stuff, but it's that synthesis that he has of the ancient and the period setting and burgeoning technology, but it's little touches like what I chose for my favorite thing for episode 1 was the fact that those one section of protagonists are Russian. As me, I just, it was timed with the first time I'd seen a Chekhov play at the Royal Shakespeare Company. But Russian just seemed slightly. I'd seen lots of war films, but everyone had been Germans and English.
Yes.
So the Russian aesthetic just seemed to give it something that made it feel, to me as a teenage boy watching it, a little bit more grown up, a little bit more eclectic. It gave it a little bit more verisimilitude. So that was my thing. Whereas Alan's thing, who's my guest on this podcast, he chose the World War II setting, which kind of is tied in with that, which seemed to give this story a particular feel.
Okay, that set me up perfectly for what I had to say, because I sat down with Ian. We thought very carefully about what we wanted to do, because you say it's very different from Dragonfire. To me, the biggest difference is that it's better directed, more sympathetically directed. And I was going to say the design is better, but that's not true. The design in Dragonfire was actually great, but the lighting was rubbish. So the design was not sympathetically lit, but you got good design and good lighting in in Fenric. So what I'm saying is they're not as different as you think. It's just that one was really well presented to us and the other isn't, i.e. Dragonfire wasn't. So Briggs and I sat down thinking very carefully about what we were going to do for the next one. And quite early on, we decided World War II, because the BBC does period stuff so great. I don't know if at that point we'd already begun to see how wonderful Ghostlight was looking. I can't remember what the sequence was, but Ghostlight is a classic example of a great Doctor Who story because it's Victorian period. And the BBC is great at period. In any case, we were smart enough to know that we wanted to do an Earth-based story, because they're always better, because it's so hard to create an alien planet. And we wanted to do an historical story because the BBC is so great at that. And quite early on, we thought World War II, brilliant. But we thought, let's do something different. Like the standard take on World War II is Germans. So let's not go down that route. Let's have the Russians. That's exactly what we thought. We just thought we'll dodge the obvious one and make it Russians. And that just, in the same way that for you, it made it way better. For us, it made it way better too. And that was such a crucial decision. World War II and Russians really give it a special flavor and make it outstanding.
Yeah. And if you're a pretentious drama student, as I was at the time, the fact that I could spot which Chekhov plays all the names came from as well.
Oh, that's great. We see that's all totally Briggsian, because I still don't know much about. I just finished missing a production of A Cherry Orchard because I had a mouse in the house. This is a true story. I woke up, there's a mouse, and I had to deal with a mouse in the house, and I missed a matinee of The Cherry Orchard. But that strikes me as a rather Chekhovian thing to have happened.
Yeah, actually. Absolutely. Why wasn't she here? Because there was a mouse in the house. Yeah, absolutely.
And all of which to say, I didn't know that he was smuggling in Chekhov character names, but that's so Briggs, and I think that's so wonderful.
They are all Chekhov. So if you'd seen the Cherry Orchard, I think Vershinin is the Cherry
Orchard.
Oh,
that's wonderful. I didn't know this. Thank you. I'm learning things.
Petorossi, and they're all in there. And in fact, Prozorov he changes in the book to Trofimov, but they're both names from Chekhov as well. Even the guy on the beach who doesn't get any lines, who's Gaev, who's a bit vague. Gaev is a Chekhov as well. So they're all there.
I'm going to be on the email to Briggs right after this. It's so hilarious and wonderful too. Really great.
Yeah, nice touch.
He's a classy guy, Briggs, Ian Briggs, and that also perhaps speaks to his great ability to create characters. I've worked with wonderful writers on Doctor Who, but Ian Briggs always struck me as the one who is the most gifted at creating three-dimensional characters, and perhaps that's one reason why is that his diet, the diet of his mind was things like Chekhov.
Well, hello, and welcome to this commentary for episode 2 of The Curse of Fenric. My special guest is Allan Lear, who is a fabulous fellow, and if ever you need anybody to proofread a book for you, then Allan is the man. He hadn't actually proofread any of my books when he recorded his contribution to this, which was at the very beginning of that plague we all lived under a while ago. But we've shattered our chains now, and we're back into the real world. And since then, I've preyed upon Allan's goodwill, and he's dotted the I's, crossed the T's, and removed unnecessary words or inaccurately placed pieces of grammar, and made, hopefully, my Quatermass book, volume 1 of my Quatermass book, readable. He's chosen, I think, one of the undisputed highs of Doctor Who. I know, a lot of old school people, 80s Who is incapable of the highs, reached by the series, in the golden eras of the 60s and 70s. And I used to be a bit like that, where anything new was kind of frowned upon. But I have to say, I always liked The Curse of Fenric. And now, of course, I have favourites from 60s, 70s and 80s Who. 80s Who is kind of freed from the guilt by association with having been watched by me when it went out. And I was, this is great, but I'm sure the olden days were much better. Well, now it's all the olden days. Curse of Fenric, soldiers, period setting, dollops of horror. That's kind of my kind of Who. And as I say, I watched this over and over again as a kid. Haven't watched it for a while. We are watching the original, the as broadcast version. And as of this episode, because the good people of Patreonville, after I put the first episode out, I sort of mused and went, I should maybe see what Andrew Cartmel says, because he did offer to, contribute to further Sylvester McCoy stories that he had script edited, having chosen himself Dragonfire as his contribution to Happy Times and Places, which was one of the early ones, released a couple of years ago. Check that out if you haven't. Lots of insight from Andrew. And so I dropped him a line, and so as of this episode, he will be the coder, where I haven't done the conversation yet, because, of course, I have to watch and choose my favourite thing, and then I have to interview him and see if his favourite thing is either mine or Alan's or neither of ours. So that's all in the future now. That's a joy I have to do in my timeline tomorrow morning, but for you, you just have to wait till the end of the episode. But obviously I have to choose my favourite thing first, because if I listen to what his is, I could just then come back, watch this and go, I think my favourite thing is the third hut from the left, which Andrew said was a place of where he got to hang out and do exciting things. I'm sure the third hut from the left won't be his favourite thing. I can guarantee that now. That's not a spoiler. That's just a guess. Right. But if I'm to do that, and to do that well, I have to watch the episodes now before I speak to him tomorrow. So before tomorrow is today, I'm going to press play in on part 2 of The Curse of Fenric. BritBox says the Ultima machine offers to break the chains of the wolves of Fenric, which is what I first knew this story as before it was announced as having a different title. So please do what I'm going to do, which is press play in 3, 2, 1. That's having read that blurb on BritBox has reminded me, and I'm going to do a confession now. Until I read the novel of The Curse of Fenric, I thought it was called The Ultimate Machine. I'm afraid so. I have to hold my hands up to that. We all have our mishearings, don't we? I'm sure Rob Shearman has one in The King's Demons where the Master says, "You can't have a proof, Doctor," and Rob thinks he says, "You can't have proof, Doctor," or the other way around. We all have our ones where we think somebody says a thing and we can never quite shake it. Well, for me, it was always, it was the ultimate machine. Beautiful rocks, aren't they? This is a great setting, this beach setting. And it's little touches like that, isn't it? Very grim, going, no, we don't want to make too much noise, so we're going to bayonet them, which is, a horrible, visceral sort of thing. Reminds me a little bit of that bit in Genesis of the Daleks, where they say, instead of these, we can't afford bullets anymore, so instead of these prisoners being shot, they'll be hanged. There's no need for that to be there, but it just makes this whole business of death a bit grimmer. And I love these bits that this story has, where quite often in drama these days you'd probably have somebody going, "I shall pick up this book and I'm going to read this thing," but we just jump straight into it. And when you've got a wonderful actor like Dinsdale Landon, and all of this great underwater shooting, and I think this is all really good. Although, I bet that was cold. And all of this, you don't really know what's going on just at the moment. Why are these magic words suddenly appearing? But it's all, it's all mysterious, and it's all this whole thing about the Viking curse. It's a bit Nigel Neely, isn't it? Something from the ancient past still retains some kind of power, and it is, it is there in the stones, and that's all very evocative stuff. And this is great. The dead body opening its eyes underwater. This is not the sort of thing one's expected to see in Doctor Who at this time. So this felt to me like, the show was going through an absolute renaissance of style, especially when you think about, season 24, which was very sort of light end sets, and I know what we know what they were trying to do, and those oddball stories have a kind of charm to them, but this to me felt like what Doctor Who really should be doing. He's good, this guy, the extra playing Gaev, and this is Marek Anton, who I remember being quite, because my best friend at school was a young woman called Catherine, who many years later I married and subsequently divorced, but let's not get into all of that. But I remember being, quite chuffed, because when I, had this on when my mates were around, because I was trying to convert them all to the ways of Doctor Who, she took a shine to Marek Anton, and as I've discovered since, I think some of the gay male Doctor Who fan contingent also, are not averse to the charms of Mr. Anton. I suspect he could probably, hoover up some totty of whatever flavour should he go to a Doctor Who convention, or should he have gone to one then. But I know they did. For a while, nobody actually quite knew where he was, but I noticed Pete McTighe did get him for the making of on this, and Phantom Films got him for a convention. So, but I think he's back in Poland now. He did an episode of the Paradise Club, and of course he's the Destroyer in Battlefield. So he had he had a good time on Doctor Who this year before scootling off and doing whatever he ended up doing. This church is much better than having a set, isn't it? I'm reminded of what Alan said in episode 1. Use the ultimate machine. No, he says saying ultimate machine. I know it's great. There's the speed of this is fantastic. It rattles, and yet it's, even though it's quite speedy, it's atmospheric, and the church setting is terrific. And this is a great piece of plotting. They weren't here this morning, and you go, oh, that's a wonderful piece of mystery. And, that's a great riddle, isn't it? How can something be ancient and, current? And, oh, yes, and this is, of course, there's a secret base beneath the church. And this is terrific. I mean, this having it all on location, can sometimes be, you sometimes have to sort of build sets inside existing buildings, and it can look a bit now. I mean, there's a compromise there because it's pretty obvious where he went, and these guys are acting their socks off. But Sylvester tapping on the wall to the left is like, no, you know it wasn't there because it wasn't that far away. But anyway, it's and that staging was a little bit phony. The way he sort of does Ace and the turn, that's an actor that's been told to stand on that spot and do that turn, but that's okay. That's a beautiful shot, and this is a lovely piece of acting from Nicholas Parsons. I remember, when this went out and seeing this bit and going, oh gosh, no, any reservations I might have had about Nicholas Parsons are completely out of the window now. And in the special edition, this scene is longer, and I'm not sure it benefits from being longer, because I think the way that this, I know. It adds a little bit of the uncertainty because he says that line again, but I actually think ending on that slightly sort of plaintive moment, is absolutely fine. It's very good, and if you don't know about the special edition, I certainly don't think that you miss anything. And I always think this is a bit horrible because they hit a man with a hat, don't they? That's pretty horrible because they have to do this sort of silent and deadly thing. But I never quite got what they're doing with Proserov here, because he's quite happy here, saying it's as quiet as the grave, and then in the next scene he's all sad about them having to kill everybody. So I feel the character of Proserov, who does get fleshed out a little bit in the book, I didn't quite work out, because I think he doesn't have enough of to establish him. I know he's got the bit when he's on the cliff and he says to the girls, no closer, please, because he doesn't want to shoot them. I wasn't entirely clear that was him, and then he was the guy on the beach, and he was the guy who was having. It took me a few times. I watched it a few times. It took me a few times to work out which Russian was which, and especially I think it's confusing because he seems so chuffed about that massacre that they've just carried out, and then he's being all sad, and Captain Sorin says, we have to do these things. So yeah, that's when I'd probably give another pass if I was reassembling this or watching the rushes. I'd go, I think we need to just be slightly clearer on Proserov. It may be just me being stupid. Peter Tchaikovsky, who plays him, was at Manchester University with Sophie Aldred, and where I went too. See, look, we've just seen him go, it's as quiet as the grave. Oh, and, they are going, the Sarge likes killing people. He's very good at killing people. But now he's sad about killing people. I suppose, it could have just hit him but, I don't, I said, watching it now, you're going, okay, it's clear that he was the guy before. I don't know. It just seems a funny shift to me. Churches are great for Doctor Who. So you've got Wainwright questioning his faith, which of course is a thing that will have happened a lot during the war to people like him. But of course, faith becomes important to the storytelling because faith is what repels the hemovores. So that becomes a nice little sort of subtext that helps with the plot and helps with the danger, but also informs the character. I mean, Nicholas Parsons is terrific in this, and he was always, he always did remind people in interviews and stuff, well, I am an actor, and I know a couple of friends who've sort of mocked him for that, sort of go, so, and he was going, oh, well, I am an actor, and you go, well, yeah, I do kind of get that, because when when mostly what you do is comedy is rather looked down on in this country, even if you're very good at it. I think we admire drama people more than we admire comedians. Comedians are seen as a bit low and a bit dirty, and seeking a laugh is not as honourable a pursuit as seeking to move people. I don't know why, because we all need a laugh, and so I think a lot of comedians who are actors as well, this physician is healing himself as he's speaking to you, do much prefer the idea, I think, of as being seen as being capable of the serious stuff as well, because it seems somehow more noble and worthy than comedy, which I think, says more about us than it should. And Parsons had a long and illustrious career as a comic and as a presenter of Just a Minute, which is a marvelous, very simple radio idea, and one of the best radio panel shows ever. But I'm sure there was part of him that went, but I am an actor, and so this is where John Nathan Turner's policy of going, well, let's put people who are familiar for some things into other situations is a worthwhile thing to do. I mean, it does sometimes backfire, and sometimes it backfires because we're quite limited and we find it difficult to imagine that person doing the thing that we're not used to them doing. But I think Parsons is one of those who passes with flying colours. I love this scene. I just think the writing, I think the director, I think Alfred Lynch's performance, he's got a really sort of broken quality about him, but a sort of strange intensity as well. I love the way he performs this scene. And as I say, I wasn't massively familiar with his work when he was announced. And look, I think he's got that wonderful sort of distant look in his eyes and that slightly broken quality that he has. But also, he's intense. He's totally, he's mad. But he's totally committed to this terrible thing that he's going to do. And then, of course, the irony that the word is love is, I think there's so much in that scene that really works and is really effective. And that scene might be my favourite bit of the episode. Certainly what I thought it would probably be going into it. I feel sorry for these soldiers because they do get, because of course the napper bits always stuck out to me in a story that's so good. And again, look at this. If this was in a studio, this wouldn't just have the right sort of feel of dampness in the air and the clink of the bricks. But the idea that you see an ancient vase, and the question is it marked government property? I mean, there's a way that I suppose that could be played as it's quite a good sort of joke and gag, but it's not. And then he chucks it on the floor and it sort of bounces. I mean, these two deserve a medal, I think, for going into the sea and go, oh, it's lovely and warm in the water, and you go, I don't think it is. I think every part of you has retracted and is you are cold, and that's pretty grim, isn't it? And there is something about water. I find the sea terrifying. Ever since Jaws, I have found it's because you can't see. It's because you can't see. I remember going to, beach holidays when I was a kid. You'd cut your feet open on the, you go into the sea and it was a minefield because there'd be rocks and you tear your feet open on the stairs whilst going into really cold sea and dodging jellyfish. And you go, this is the fun part of the year. But there's something about the fact that you can't see. And I'm afraid ever since Jaws, I've been terrified of the sea, even though I know we don't get sharks in the water in the UK. And that's that's where fear comes from. There's no logic when it comes to fear. Logically, I know there aren't any sharks in the sea, but I screamed in terror at the idea. I remember we were on holiday and there was a bit where the sea came in and it created a sort of lake. So when the tide went out, you still had, it was a self-contained. It was like a big swimming pool, but outdoors. That this cove that had sort of been filled by the sea. So the tide was out as well, and there were loads of people. And I thought, well, I can swim across that. And I got in, and I remember absolutely losing it and going, no, there's a shark, there's a shark, there's a shark. The things that we remember that make us crimson with embarrassment. And this is a lovely device because there's something rather archaic about the ticker tape, but it also means it sort of takes a bit of time. But the noise gives it a bit of atmosphere as well. I love the way he says the lines as well, all these lines as well. The sort of the scientific zeal that he has. And that's a good line. It can translate it, but who knows what it might mean. But there's something about the feeding of that information out that is again just adds to the sort of drawing out the tension and the spookiness. Now it's interesting. I hated these two vampires when I was a kid, and I think it's because I want my monsters RP, and there is absolute received pronunciation, like what I talk. And it was always a joke that Storr in Invasion of Time had been Cockney. We will fight you on your own ground, Doctor. And that you don't expect monsters to have an accent. Now that's entirely theatrical convention and social conditioning. That I know Philip Hinchcliffe, is not a fan at all of monsters who speak in Shakespeare, and that's great. You see, that's absolute proper Doctor Who. A man is lured into the sea, and I like the way that they sort of look and they sort of enjoy that and go, "Oh, we've just done a sexy death thing." But I hated them at the time. I think because, I suppose I didn't identify that sort of Cockney thing with being seductive, and they're supposed to be seducing him into the water, and I don't think you could do that with Cockney accent, which is utter snobbery on my part, and I'm sure a sexy Cockney could easily seduce me, so I don't know what I'm talking about. But I found them a real issue with the story at the time now. And actually watching it this time around, going to that, I think they perform it very well. I mean, I think stoically too. I mean, just the sheer practical thing of being in the water. But they don't stick out in the way that they were really problematic for me when I watched it. I hated the scenes with them. And I like the way he says, "Shut up." He's brilliant, actually, Dinsdale Landon. He's did I say yeah, and that's nice for Ace as well, because of course she knows her stuff because she's from our time, so her maths and scientific knowledge and all that sort of thing is much more advanced than even the cleverest people of the 1940s. That's because we are an accumulation of the knowledge and experience of those who came before us. And they're actually quite scary, aren't they? I mean, this is that's very sort of stagey, isn't it? In that it doesn't cut quite quickly enough. Is that they sort of, it's sort of like, okay, darlings, you sort of loom over her and cut. And then John Nathan Turner's dog in the background, and it doesn't. It's a little bit stagey, and I think the long nails are perhaps a vampiric addition too far, sort of thing that might look better on film. They just look a bit And poor old Miss Hardacre. So that's the end of Janet Tenfrey, who always plays these sort of harridans, and she's a very lovely woman. And of course, she has a brilliant claim to fame in that she played a terrible school teacher in two Dennis Potter pieces, Nigel Barton and Singing Detective, many years apart, practically doing the same sort of scene. And of course, she turned up in Mummy and the Orient Express, so she's done old and new Who, bless her. And that part, I know June Hudson, the costume designer, who is now an actress, was also up for, but Janet Tenfrey got it. This is a very nicely directed scene. Yes, Nick Mallet, the guy who directed The Mysterious Planet and Paradise Towers. Where have you been hiding yourself? the mist is beautiful. The fact it's in a graveyard, the lovely addition of the smoke, the decision to have Parsons facing us with them behind him. This is all terrific stuff. He's great. And then, McCoy comes in, all fiery, righteous Time Lord indignation. This is good, He's not always great at the high drama, but actually he does that very well. Yeah, I'm not sure those nails are doing well. Actually, I don't mind them as much as I once did. I like the way they turn in unison, and the music sort of scores that as well. That's very good. There's a lot of attention to detail. I think everybody knows that they're onto a good thing here, and everyone's pulling out all the stops. And of course, Mark Ayres is the musician who is this Mark's first one. Mark is an absolutely terrific chap. He's done so much great work for sound restoration and guarding the archive of the Radiophonics Workshop. But much like Nicholas Parsons, I'm sure you go, Mark, you're such a brilliant sound restorer and guardian of the archive, and he's been very helpful on anybody who's got a project that involves a bit of sound. Knows how helpful Mark has been, but I'm sure Mark goes, yes, but I would remind you I'm a very good musician too, and he is a very good musician too, and I love this particular theme as well, which is it quite John Carpenter-y, I think people have said, but this monsters rising from the sea, and the genius of the Haemovores as well, of course, is that they're in sort of old period costumes that have got whelks and knots and carbuncles all sort of grown on them and their faces, and they do look a bit sort of zombie like. I actually really like the ones with hair. Hair doesn't always work on monsters, but because it looks like they were once human and that they've sort of mutated under the sea. And there's some pleasing genuine mud as well, because it's a very wet. It's a sort of very wet story, isn't it? There's loads of rain and it feels sort of visceral and everything. Doctor, yeah, great, and that's a lovely camera. It's not quite the sort of crash zoom of the Colin. It's more of a sort of it's more of a sort of track in, but at speed. And I think that's and I didn't quite press the button in time to can I resume? No, watch again. So I'm afraid I've lost the credits, which is a shame, because I like watching the credits. It's part of the program, but I was too busy talking about trying to invent a term for that camera move that I don't know the official term for, but it didn't seem like a crash zoom for me. It was because it went round slightly as well, so it was more of a sort of arc in. Just again, a little bit of attention to detail that just makes it. Even the things that Doctor Who normally does, I would say this story does just a little bit better. I think it's great. And actually, the things that I wasn't wild about the first time round, the two Cockney vampires, I love Janet Henfrey. She's a very, very nice woman, and she's had an illustrious career behind her. But Miss Hardacre is a tricky character. The sort of the honourable spinster saying, don't go down to this. I'm going to try and make the sea a metaphor for sexual intercourse, and I'm going to do it in an intransient way. It's definitely a worthwhile thing to be attempting, and quite grown up for Doctor Who. But I'm not sure it quite hangs together, because the kind of lines she's given, are a bit from the sort of, stereotypical Harridan handbook, and also, she has to speak in kind of metaphor because, it's Doctor Who. Although the real character in those days, she wouldn't have been explicit in because people didn't talk about things explicitly in those days. I don't know. It's a sort of shrill note that is not necessarily an easy watch in a way, and despite the fact that the intent behind it is good, and everybody doing it has talent. It just doesn't. And you know, sometimes you can throw all that stuff together and it still doesn't quite work. You know, I have to be honest that's a bit that doesn't quite work for me. So I wasn't sorry to see Miss Hardacre get killed. Which is those things you can only say when watching television. Where I didn't mind when they got killed. I was quite pleased when they got killed. And the Proserov thing, I was sort of talked myself out of that as I was saying it, but I remember it puzzling me at the time, and I hadn't realised it was him that was being lured. I hadn't quite worked out which Russian was which is a shame because the Russians are my sort of, you know, I always really liked it when they went back to the Russians. I wanted to see what was going on with those guys more than with, say, the Cockney vampires. But actually, I thought the scene where they lured him in, I thought Joanne Kenny and Joanne Bell actually did that very well. I do like the bit where he's pulled under and it cuts back to them and they're going, "Oh yeah, sexy vampire death," and that, you know, pulling him under the water, and then the shot of him from beneath with the air bubble in his mouth. That's pretty grim stuff. I love all the watery stuff. You know, setting it by the beach, and of course Whitby was where Dracula came ashore, and all of that sort of stuff. So it's a vampire story, even though actually the monsters are kind of zombies. So that's quite handy because you've got the you know, the tropes and the iconography and the imagery of both, which is super. And the scene with the unbreakable pot that hasn't got government property on it. But even that, you know, that scene with those two guys with their shirt sleeves rolled up, and you could feel the damp, you can hear the clink of the brick. The fact that we're on location, you know, even makes a scene like that would have, you know, probably been a bit polystyrene-y and a bit, you know, studio-y, echo-y, you know, just feels a bit more real, you know, and that helps them seem more like soldiers, you know. So it's firing on all cylinders, and as I say, the bits that I was so acutely aware of because I was such an embarrassed teenager, you know, have sort of smoothed their way into it a bit more than maybe they had when anything that wasn't quite my cup of tea stuck out and you know, vexed me. In the same way, really, as that, you know, when I was a kid, you know, it was 60s and 70s and then 80s who was a bit of a, you know, didn't quite fit in with the rest of it because it was the stuff that I watched, so not as good as the stuff that had come before me. Whereas now, of course, I think 80s who, you know, is a part of that whole of the classic series and has an equal amount of things I love, and actually as I get older, the things I don't forgive, as with every era, especially doing this project, seem blissfully unimportant, and I just go, well, it's fine, doesn't matter, and it's a much more enjoyable way to watch the show, I have to say. So I loved all of that. I thought all of that was good, but I do think my favourite thing is Alfred Lynch poisoning some pigeons, if I'm going to put it like that, is that wonderful scene of... even though it's a shame because, you know, all those cylinders look like they've been sort of vac formed together, which is just a slight little thing. It's the sort of thing that if I was watching it with my brothers, they'd point out. But actually, you know, the set design is, you know, the feel of the thing is, you know, it does feel like you're in a real space, and it does feel there is a sense that this is a you know, a vast complex that all sort of fits together in a way that not all Doctor Who stories can always achieve. So never mind that. This is all good. But yeah, I think that scene, I think the music in that scene is great. I think the writing of that scene is great. And I think Alfred Lynch absolutely pitches it perfectly. He's obviously very, very committed to the cause, and frighteningly so. But he's not playing it as sort of hard-nosed evil villainy. He's you know, he's got a far away look in his eyes, and he's obviously a very damaged person, but, you know, he still, you know, gets the irony of that, you know, that punchline of, you know, what the word is that's going to activate the booby trap that's going to cause all that horrible, vile death. Which and you know, that makes a virtue of the wartime setting that Alan talked about last week. Of, you know, we're of course we're the goodies in the war, you know, and history tells us, you know, that, you know, we've fought against fascism and did a good thing and saved the world from, you know, being consumed by a, you know, terrible regime. But, you know, this story, even though it's, you know, kiddies tea time telly kind of thing, although no, it's later than tea time by this stage, but still, you can't be too adult with Doctor Who. He goes, well, yeah, but let's look at what we think about the morality of war, and even, you know, a conflict that we had to win, and history is thankful to us for winning. You know, moral compromises have to be made, and what do we think about that? And, you know, this is worth just chewing over, even though we can't do anything about it. It's worth just chewing over that, you know, goodies and baddies is slightly more complicated in real life. But I just love that scene. I think everything about that scene it's one of those scenes that, again, you could have just given that information in a couple of lines, but it becomes a set piece scene that is, you know, really quite startling, because you know, you watch the birds being killed, and, you know, Millington then has, you know, no problem with, you know, imagining that on a grander scale and with people. No offense to the pigeons, and it's it's beautifully written, beautifully acted, wonderfully scored, excellently directed. My kind of, and the sort of scene you can only really get in Doctor Who as well. I don't know, and yet quite unlike your usual Doctor Who scene, it's taken a bit of thought to put that scene in and make it that way, and it makes it a superb scene. I love it. So I'm going to choose that scene where Millington poisons the pigeons. What is Alan's favourite bit of the Curse of Fenric, episode 2?
Episode 2, do you know what? The possessed girls, they absolutely terrified me as a kid. It wasn't the Haemovores so much, because they're just baddies, but it was the possessed girls. It was the fact that they can turn you into these creatures. It was sort of like probably my first introduction to a kind of the faculty invasion of the body snatchers, pod people sort of idea. So yeah, I thought that was really scary, and the way they fiddle with their fingernails when they come from Mrs. Heaven creeped me out. So yeah, I'm going to go with them.
Now, isn't that interesting? The thing that because I'm a little bit older than Alan, the bit that was sort of it was long fingernails down a blackboard for me, and the element that I struggled with as a touchy teenager, were for a kid who, you know, not unlike me in many ways, but a bit younger, but, you know, similar sort of personality. They were the bit that really got him and really spoke to him and terrified him and did what Doctor Who needs to do to him. So that's another sign of, you know, a story working very cleverly, because there were bits that, you know, I really latched onto. I loved all the military stuff. I loved the Russian stuff, it being by the sea, you know, the intrigue and you know, moral dilemmas at the core of the sort of wartime stuff. And he's going, no, it's because they were nice, you know, they were nice cheeky girls, and now they're, you know, possessed horrible vampires. And, you know, that's another Philip Hinchcliffe thing, wasn't it, of going, you know, you actually get an actor and you get them to act the monstrous stuff, because that's better than somebody stuck behind rubber or whatever. Very good, very good. So that's, you know, that just goes to show that while I was cringing through those bits, you know, not that far away, watching on another telly, you know, a few hundred miles away, was somebody not much younger than me, whose cringes were those of fear. So I'm sure I will discuss some of these issues with Andrew Cartmel, who I haven't spoken to yet. So excuse me while I pop off to the future and see what the script editor of this story has to say, and what his favourite bit of episode 2 of The Curse of Fenric is. So, episode 2, I I'm just trying to think right, yes. Now this was very interesting because I changed my view on some of the Curse of Fenric watching it this time, and this is the joy about revisiting stuff. One of the things I thought hadn't worked for me as a younger person was the aesthetic of, or maybe just even the sound of, the Cockney vampires seemed wrong to me, and I'm prepared to hold my hands up and say this is probably my upbringing of RP monsters and
these are the girls,
some snobbery, yeah. And actually, this time round watching them, I think they're fine. I think they're great, and I think they're troopers as well. But they were actually Alan's favourite thing, and he's a couple of years younger than me. So when I was a stroppy teenager watching it, he was a few years younger, and they to him were the most memorable bit because unlike the Hemivores, they were people that he'd seen as people, and now you saw them with their humanity removed, and that was the frightening thing for him. Whereas the best thing for me is the scene where Millington kills the doves and does that thing about the ciphers and it being the word love. So we both chose very different things there. I don't know if you have a favorite out of those two.
Well, that reminds me that another really crucial element, besides World War II, Russians, was the whole Turing enigma approach to that. I mean, that Ian knew a lot about that, and he introduced that into the story, which and that really adds a whole dimension to it. And he knew a lot about the algorithms. You know, he has that thing where Ace recognizes the logic problem because it's something that she's seen in school, and equating those with, and he knew about the Vikings, you know, and the Fenris Wolf, all that stuff. That was all from Ian. I mean, he's a very, I'm getting a bit of goosebumps. He's such an eclectic mind. Yeah, but the other thing I wanted to mention was Hemivores. Now, the thing was, we'd written these scripts. When I say we, Ian had written these scripts with my help and supervision, and they're full of vampires. They were just full of vampires, and lots of lovely vampires. And John freaked out, like, you know, we could. He was strange about this because he sort of sometimes had a bit of a tin ear. Like, he would have stuff on the show which was incredibly brutal and offensive, and you think, oh, that's fine. An example would be Vengeance on Varos.
Yeah.
Does anybody remember when the guys fall into the acid bath and the doctor says, oh, don't mind if I don't join you, or something like that? Anyway, so John would let stuff like that through, and, you know, then he'd be surprised when there's blowback from it. But on the other hand, he'd read the word vampire in the script and he'd flip out because he thought, you know, it would get us into deep shit because, you know, too scary and all that. And so, I mean, that's nonsense, but you know, he was in charge. So I talked to Ian about it. We agreed we're not going to change anything except for the word vampire. And Ian came up with the word Hemivore, blood eater. And just I think he just did a global search and replace of vampire for Hemivore, and that was it. And that was fine. I mean, we did exactly the same thing with Silver Nemesis. It was full of Nazis. It was full of Nazis. And John was like, oh, we can't have, I don't know why you can't have Nazis. I mean, these were Nazis du jour. They were nouveau Nazis, you know, whatever you call those. But so we just did this thing where we changed the word Nazi to paramilitary, and that was it. That was all we did. So when anyway, it's just, to me, it strikes me as just foolish. But if that's what, if, you know, if a Nazi has to become a paramilitary or a vampire has to become a Hemivore, that's a small price to pay. But yeah, all that Bletchley Park stuff, all that Enigma Alan Turing stuff was also really wonderful.
I wonder if it's because they evoke other, more, in inverted commas, existing adult drama. So Nazis are from, you know, quite grown-up films, and vampires are from Universal horror movies, whereas a lot of Doctor Who stuff, isn't it curious that World War II is such a dramatic setting, and yet Doctor Who hadn't done World War II up to that point. Vampires, you've got them in State of Decay, but that was the first time, you know.
Were we seriously the first Doctor Who World War II story? That's incredible. Seriously, whoa. Yeah. And then we did it in a very different way. Isn't that fantastic? Yeah. We did World War II in from a completely unusual angle. I had no idea, Toby. I mean, I just assumed that it was one of the periods that had been strip mined in earlier stories.
You would think, wouldn't you? And no, it's really curious. And of course, he came up with the name Hemivore because that's in a little-known Chekhov play. Actually, that's what. No, it's not really.
You had me.
Yeah, it's the name of a sad. It's the
me.
name of a sad landowner. Yeah, he's Mr. Hemivore. No, it's but you know, it's a good wheeze, isn't it? But yeah, there is something about a vampire, about a blood drinker that seems a bit more visceral than your normal Doctor Who monster. Maybe that's it.
I have no idea what the thinking was, but that's as plausible an explanation as any.
Well, I'm glad I was able to come up with a plausible explanation. I'll probably come up with more of those than I will points, as is usually the case with Happy Times and Places. But hey, it's not the winning, it's the taking part that counts. And we have an additional person taking part this time around, the script editor of the story. I'm really thrilled about that and grateful to Andrew, who'll be back next time. Well, it's raining outside. I mean, it really is. It's pounding it. There's been a lot of rain in Manchester as I record this July 2023. And I know it is raining in the land of Doctor Who in 1989, which I remember when 1989 was new. And hello to all those listeners who weren't even born when this was on. It's lovely that you're listening, and also terrifying that you're able to. I had met Sylvester McCoy not long before this, and I remember asking him, is Dinsdale Landon the main guest star? Because Dinsdale Landon seemed like a very important actor, and it was important to me that important actors, because sometimes important actors, with Remembrance of the Daleks, Peter Halliday, Michael Sheard, they weren't playing massive parts, and so it was just suddenly became very important to me that, illustrious actors were being at least accorded with main guest star status, and, of course, Sylvester was like, well, yeah, I suppose so, but it didn't enter his head that, I haven't really thought of, who's top guest billing or whatever, because not everybody thinks of those things. But I do, and that was there even then, all those years ago. 89. I mean, it's extraordinary to think that this is 34 years old. So this is now older by quite some margin than An Unearthly Child was when this was on, and I find that a terrifying thing to contemplate, because I was quite compos mentis when this was on. I was capable of doing things, and on taking my first steps into adulthood. Well, how old was I? I was born in 74, so I was only 15. I felt terribly grown up. And certainly I have very vivid memories of this period. And of course, most of my vivid memories. In fact, I found an old diary not long ago, and quite a few of my diary entries are what I thought of Doctor Who at this time. Ha ha ha. Never mind world events. I've put a few world events in there as well. Anyway, look, I've got to fit in an interview with Andrew Cartmel tomorrow, so that the end of this podcast has some added interest. So, not too much preamble. I'm sure you're absolutely fine with that. Let us crack on by pressing play on episode 3 of The Curse of Fenric in 3, 2, 1. And listen to that rain, my goodness. And here it pops in right now. Oh, it's being slow. Of course, because it's the 21st century, and we have an internet superhighway, a repository of all the worldwide information that zooms along at record-breaking speed without the need for wires. That it's really slow and glitchy if it bloody rains. Ha ha ha! Oh, you see, it's not. My internet hub is not the ultimate machine. So I don't know what's happening here. I might have to pause and do this again, but I might keep all those words in, because do we like that though? Is now feedback, because I actually get annoyed when I listen to podcasts when they'll sort of say, who's that actor from that? Oh, I don't know. And then they go, let's look it up on IMDb, and you hear them looking it up on IMDb or going out of the room to consult a thing and then coming back in, and I'm thinking, come on guys, edit that out. I don't need to listen to you finding out that thing that you're going to come and tell me now. you should know it anyway if I'm listening to you, because why else? I don't need to listen to you having a lovely conversation. But then when I make sort of errors or something goes wrong, I think, oh well, they might quite like to listen to the mistakes, because that makes it seem more real, and it's not. And then you go, yeah, and that means it's not polished and focused and professional. And I think one should be all of those things. So I don't know the answer to that, but I will keep that in as a talking point. Not that we will discuss it, I'm sure, but I'm now going to press pause and see if I can kick my internet into some sort of action. We're sorted now, so let's press play on episode, very exciting episode I seem to recall from my youth, episode 3 of The Curse of Fenric. Yes, it's odd, because I sort of think of my enjoyment of Doctor Who as a teenager, going, oh, I wasn't very happy with it, I got cross with it all the time because I was a cross teenager. But actually, I was still really excited whenever Doctor Who came on, and I was videoing it, and I used to video the trailers. So I'd video So the 7 episodes I filled with the first 2 stories. I put the trailers for the second 2 stories at the end of that, and at the beginning of the tape that had the second 2 stories of the season, I'd have the trailers from the first. And I'd worked out this system of where I could sort of roll forward and roll back by pressing pause first and then record, so that I wouldn't lose, that I wouldn't have any unnecessary footage from the other programs that were being trailed or whatever. But actually a couple of times I got too clever with that and actually recorded over the end of the previous week's trailer, so I fiddled a little. Anyway, but that was all, that was all part of it. It wasn't just watching the show, it was work. I was quite proud of myself because I worked out when trailers would be on and I would record them and that sort of thing. And as I say, we would have alcohol-fueled parties, which I did when I was this age, and I'd bring my Doctor Who videos with me. But that was partially because we had a slight problem with the video. I always think this is quite fun as well. He's like, right, how's he disabled the radio equipment? He's just twatted them with an axe. And it's funny because Perkins, I kind of expected Perkins would be the sort of character who, when all hell breaks loose at the beginning of episode 4, is on sentry duty and gets sort of killed or whatever. But actually, he just completely disappears. Perkins is also an excellent name for a soldier. There's a Private Perkins, isn't there, in The Invasion? But Perkins it's one of those names that seem to be a lot for sort of slightly scrawny juniors. So not suggesting that Christian Anholt is slightly scrawny. He's a beautiful boy. And now he's rather muscly, because I think he's been acting in That America, and you have to be quite muscly there. And the rain is falling. The rain is falling outside in real life, and the rain is falling on the cast here. Oh, I can see a lovely robin playing outside in the rain. He's having a bath. This rain, of course, gives for a really oppressive atmosphere, and it's obviously really muddy underfoot. And this is great. A nice. Shez and I always do this thing. If somebody's dead in something, we go ep-fee, because you still get paid for being in it. And I'm pleased he's credited as well, Peter Szykovsky, because he's there. People go, oh yeah, but if he hasn't got any lines, he's an extra. No, you're not hired as an extra. You're hired as an actor. So even if your character doesn't have any lines, you should still be credited. You're an act. It's an acting performance. I like this. Don't turn him back away from him or you're dead. Look at that. That's just a gorgeous Doctor Who image of monsters through the smoke, and I love the fact that Sorin knows what they are, and I like the fact that he basically spends the episode going, these are vampires. This is all, and it really adds to the, because any danger from the past brings with it, a sense of our own mortality, because if something has come from the olden days, well, everyone in the olden days is dead, and every object is, worn away, a parody of its former self. It's broken, it's old, it's knackered, it's cobwebby. So, there's something more scary in this kind of adventure of monsters from the past. So even though they're alien herbivores and they're blue, we've got all the advantages of them being vampires. And I like the hints that these guys have a past, and it's elaborated upon in the book. But I actually think it's quite nice that that we don't have a scene saying, and when we were playing rugby and you did that. I think there's enough there to hint at a past between these two without us needing to get sort of bogged down in it. I love this bit. I used to practice. I used to do this speech when I was, in my own world, wondering about. I'm very dramatic. I've always been a frustrated. I'm an actor, but often a frustrated one. And it's that sort of. I love that whole speech about the sabotage team sent into German occupied Romania. It's all the phrasing of it and everything gives it real sort of clout and atmosphere. And I loved Captain Soren and Tomek Bork. I thought they were great, and he did a few things at around this time. I have actually emailed him back and forth, but we never actually sorted out an interview. It's odd, a bit like this, and with Fury from the Deep. Some stories, I've collected the entire cast, but but like with Fury, I don't know why I've not been as fastidious as following up the actors that I might have got an interview with or exchanged letters with. I wonder if it's that I actually quite like these stories, because I was pretty as obsessed with this as I was with Fury, really, as a kid. I knew every line, I knew every order of every cast list, and blah blah blah. And I used to think about the characters and what extra scenes the characters could have, and blah blah. And I wonder if I like to just sort of leave it as it is without going behind the scenes on it too much, because I'm sort of consumed by the adventure. I don't need to be break the fourth wall and find out all the facts. Look at that, this is brilliant, and then the shot over there, excellent, beautiful, but wonderfully directed. This is the sort of stuff I thought Doctor Who was crying out for. It was such a thrill to me that it was doing this kind of, spooky action adventure. And again, credit to Nicholas Mallet. No, I had a problem with. I'd hired a video from Granada Video, and it had sort of little flicks on the screen, and it was about to run out of its. Oh no, we'd bought it. That's it. We'd bought a video machine at this point, and it had little flicks on the screen. So just before it ran out of its guarantee, I got the engineer out, and he put a little. Thing in it and fiddled with it so that it no longer had flicks on the screen when it was playing my videos. And in fact, I said, look, here's one where it does, and here's one where it doesn't. He said, I don't need to see the ones where it doesn't, but it was a chance for me to show him a number of Doctor Who's, and so then he might go, it's this Doctor Who. I love Doctor Who. Is these old Doctor Who? Oh, yes, Doctor Who is marvellous, and I shall start watching it again and buy all the videos. I was on a constant mission to convert everybody, even a passing Granada Video repairman. But in his repairing, what I hadn't noticed, what he'd done, is that some of the stuff that had been recorded on the video machine already now didn't play properly. It had a weird sort of tracking situation going on. So all my new Doctor Who first generation beautiful off-air recordings actually did a weird tracking thing every 5 seconds. And also some of the older videos, if I started playing them and if I fast forwarded through the first sort of 10 seconds, they then didn't play with any sound, but only on that machine. It was really weird. Such were the vagaries of technology in those days. So I'd got to the point where I'd got my own video and I'd got my own set of all of the Doctor Who episodes on video, but loads of them didn't play properly for various different reasons. I've always been in a house where nothing's quite worked properly, and if we get something brand new, somebody will run it over or crack it or stain it within, minutes. I think I was destined never to live somewhere or have a life that wasn't a bit ramshackle and broken. And that I have to say, it was touch and go as to whether you saw Sophie Aldred's skirt rode up in that bit, and I was always slightly surprised that they didn't do a retake. But I think her dignity is just about kept intact. And this is because it is a sort of protracted, monster takes a while to kill the person, but the actor playing the Hemivore does at least do a little, I'm enjoying this with my fingers acting. And I love this, that they go to the effort of blowing a couple of holes in the, they can't. And what they do is they do it on the one first and then on the other one second, so because they've only got a certain amount of charges and they know they're going to have 2 shots. So the first time they shoot, it only happens to the first one, and the second time it happens to the second one. And that's a useful and sensible use of resources. That it's a sort of television it's a translation convention in a way. You know that they've fired more bullets than they've actually got squibs there, but that's okay. At least we're going to the effort of doing the squibs, which normally you don't see in a Doctor Who. That's a wonderful shot, and he's saying the names of the companions, isn't he, which is rather sweet. Sylvester McCoy is very good at all of that kind of intense, brooding, channeling faith, energy stuff. And then, I'm suddenly Scatty Doctor Who again. That's lovely. Oh, and yeah, word of support for the darker brown jacket, which I think is much better than the beigey one. I think he suits the darker colours more. And this is all lovely Doctor Who stuff. It's a great story for Ace as well, isn't it? And I like that Ace and Captain Sorin have their lovely little sort of moments. Yes, and I remember. Now that was the other thing. It was a parents' evening when this was on, so I made a friend of mine. We had a friend called Derek, who was an older chap who's a sort of handyman and stuff. But he had to come round to my house, and I had to instruct him how to press pause, record, and then press pause again on the BBC logo, so that you got the whole of the title sequence. And reader, he got it wrong. So I couldn't be cross with him, but because I was grateful to him for coming over. But he did actually miss the opening of the title sequence, and a little part of me was broken for that, because it was very important to have the whole of an episode, even if it was the title sequence, which I'd already got. I used to hate it when I got videos done by other people where they'd edited off the opening and closing credits, which people had done with E180s in order to fit 8 episodes on instead of 7. But to me, I would rather have the whole thing. I quite like the fact that Ace is. Would you be allowed to do this where the Doctor Who's companion is an arsonist? The Nitro is, as Russell says about the psychic paper. Who wants to be stopped? Stopped by a door. Well, if there's a wall in the way, it makes your companion quite funky if she blows stuff up. I'm never wild about her sort of wickedy sort of slang dialogue, but I do think it's an attempt to make a companion, away from the cliche. She is really, in my less generous moments, you sort of go, well, you've kind of retconned this, but she actually is really a conduit between old Who, classic Who, and new Who, in that she is this sort of funky, working class, yes, sort of urban companion with attitude. And I'm not quite sure I buy. Oh, she's picked up this vase in order that she thinks, oh, that'll be handy to make some bombs with later, and it happens to be the vase that they've been looking for. But it is a nice joke. And they needed to get it, and it's quite funny, so I forgive it. This is very good. And he's given her the scarf, hasn't he? I liked his scarf. And I really like this character, and it's nice to see, that the Russian soldier is actually an heroic character, and that they haven't, even though they're working contrary to what the British camp and the British base are doing, and even yes, they were our allies in the war, but at this time, the Cold War was very much in our minds, and I always feared nuclear Armageddon. So it just seemed cool and interesting, and not and it gave it a lovely vibe. Well, that was why I chose it for my thing in the first episode, that the Russians were all sort of heroic, brave guys. Oh, and I love that bit. I've missed it, haven't I? Where they go, oh, we haven't got time, and the soldiers click their weapons, and they're only extras, as if to go, we're going to stay and hold them off. And I love that. I love anything that's a moment of sort of self-sacrificial bravery. There's gazillions of them in Doctor Who and in television and film drama, and it never fails to make me go, whoa, I love that. I love being brave. I think in my ideal death will be if I've been mortally wounded and I'm on a spaceship. I've thought about this a lot. That's brilliant. I love the way I love that. That scene is really well acted. From Parsons going, they're our allies, and Millington sort of, madly sort of talking about a terrible event that had happened to him many, many years ago that he uses to justify, a terrible act that he's just done. And I love Sorin getting to be cool, and that's actually very good. That's a more budget conscious or strapped or lazier show wouldn't have had that barbed wire going back. We'd have just had it going off to the side, because then you have to have fewer poles and less barbed wire. But actually to have it there, the money's on show. I guess they were already there, but it would have been a lot to build. But it's just a little bit of camera positioning and set, because they do actually cut the barbed wire as well. So that's all pretty cool. It makes you go, oh well, I'm there, because if they've cut the barbed wire, that they must have erected that for the show. It's just a little touch that I think makes it good. And I love the fact that he comes and confronts Millington, and then does this little code that makes him go, quick, get out of here. I love all of that. This is really exciting. He's being brave. He's confronting Commander Millington. I love that. And then, get out of here. I love all of this. This is really, this is my stuff. It's terribly exciting. And yeah, as I say, my ideal death is I've been wounded on a spaceship, and you're all making your escape, and I say, no, leave me. I'll hold them off, and I'll crash the spaceship into the mothership or something like that. That's if it can't be on stage playing King Lear at the Royal Shakespeare Company, I'll go for brave self-sacrifice in order to save you lot. But there have to be witnesses. It has to be, no, go save yourself. I'm not doing it anonymously. I always wondered, because her husband is he called Frank William Dudman, and the film cameraman is called William Dudman, Bill Dudman, Frank William Dudman on season 24. And I asked Bill about this, and he said no, he didn't think so, because he didn't really work when he did the film camera work on season 24. It was largely model shots and stuff. But he's a nice guy, Bill, still in touch. But that, I think, is just a coincidence. Now, Corey Pullman is related to somebody. I'll get back to you on that, because I was looking her up the other day, and she hasn't done much recently. It's a shame, because she's got an excellent voice, a Yorkshire accent spot on. She's got a lovely sort of dusky voice, and she looks like somebody who you think has done a lot. This is nice stuff this reminds me a bit of the bit with Jamie and the Second Doctor in Evil of the Daleks, when they get cross with each other. Well, when Jamie gets cross with the Doctor and says we're finished, but that's been manipulated by the Second Doctor. The post has just come, so I'm going to have to pause. That wasn't the Wolves of Winter, nor was it the Chains of Fenric shattering. It was the Dog of Chorlton, and it was the jiffy bag coming through the letterbox. So apologies for that, but this is great. As I say, I'm never wildly convinced by Sylvester when he is doing drama. He sometimes looks as if he's in pain when I think he's trying to be serious. That sort of downturn of the mouth and that snarl is an attempt to, I think, convey emotion that doesn't always quite pay off. But he gives it a lot of attack here, and it's a wonderful speech. Credit to Ian Briggs, he writes it very well. And I like the attempt, that this adventure stakes are so high. The stakes, are so high that it's sort of driven a wedge. Oh, I'm continuing a metaphor without meaning to. Between the Doctor and companion. And look how wretched poor old Nicholas Parsons looks here, and he's just sort of waiting for the inevitable. This bit, I'm afraid, I do. Having had that lovely speech from the Doctor and the confrontation between the Doctor and Ace, you now have Ace trying to be sexy as sexy as you can only be allowed to be in Doctor Who. And he's a good actor, Marcus Hutton. He's done loads of stuff, but he's saddled with some right guff here. And what does he say? Faster than the second hand on a watch. And you go, are you trying to chat her up here, or are you go, or is he going, I'm being all sexy, and you go, yes, can I just nail you down on the timescale and the measurements that you're using here in your attempted seduction of me before I continue with my attempted seduction of you. There's Sophie Aldred, I think, is working very hard, and she's sort of going, the wind is whipping up, but it's not a sort of warm Mediterranean wind. So essentially, she's going, oh, it's a bit gusty round my chuff. But she is doing it very well. She is giving it her all. She is never not committed, Sophie Aldred. But I think the ambition that they have here to try and sort of suggest some sort of sexual awakening threesome within the companion, especially in contrast to the what happened with Jean and Phyllis and what Miss Hardacre felt about her. Something about undercurrents and bubbling, to use a metaphor for the maturing, the sexual awakening of femaleness and a companion and all of that sort of thing is I applaud the attempts. I think it's not really my kind of thing for Doctor Who. I was desperate for it to be back to the Russians being all cool and heroic, but that's because I'm a boring old bloke. But I think it's worthwhile doing. I unfortunately, it gets the impression that it's been written by somebody who's never met a woman. And they look great here. What was my problem with the vampires? I think Joanne Bell there's giving a really mean smile, and Joanne Kenny looks great. Her colouring is right for the sort of vampiric. And so yeah, I'm really over my dislike of the vampires. I'm still not sure about the fingernails. I think they need to be a different kind of fingernail. They look like they're supposed to give the impression that they tear your neck open, and actually they look like they'll snap. But this, I remember being so shocked at this, because 1, it's Nicholas Parsons, 2, it's only episode 3, and 3, he's really nice, and 4, he's not somebody expected to act, and I think he's absolutely terrified there, and he does that really well. But unfortunately, they still do that sort of stagey thing of going, instead of them grabbing him and tearing his throat out, do that thing where we loom over you and you sort of you cow down. But again, it's a kind of translation convention, because you can't show what they're really doing in Doctor Who. But then that's a brilliant shot of Rainwright dead on the floor. Judson's just been killed. It's only episode 3. It started to rain, and you're going, he's dead, and you're going, oh, what the heck? And Millington's gone absolutely, it's totally lost it. He's always been slightly sort of not there. His eye on the prize, and of course, this is a clever feint, because you think, well, Judson's dead, so something's Millington's always been a bit strange. Has he been taken over? And then, oh my gosh, he's stood up, and what's going on here? Friends of mine love this cliffhanger, and I remember, I love this story, but I remember. I love this story so much. I was like, oh, it's an ancient villain from the past. And I don't think I ever thought, oh, it's going to be the Master or Omega or something like that. I think I'd got the story enough to know, okay, this Fenric is Fenric, but the idea that they might have met the Doctor before is not we've met loads of aliens who've met the Doctor before that we haven't met. So I don't think I was worried it was falling down a nostalgia rabbit hole. But I think I was so happy in the story as it was that I wasn't that excited about hearing about, old lore, especially as it's not really old lore because they've only just, it will only just have happened. In the same way that I'm not wild about sort of grafted on nostalgia. If it's something that invokes something from the past of the show, that gives something a level of excitement. But if it's a new invented past, I'm like, okay, but I don't get as carried away. Whereas I know some people absolutely, see Fenric as a sort of A-list villain because it's somebody the Doctor has been fighting all through time. But we've only just been told that now. So that's not to criticize it. That's just to say why perhaps the cliffhanger in that part of the story that I know some people absolutely wild by. I see that cliffhanger sort of cited in loads of best ever cliffhangers, and I just sort of thought, it's okay. I'm not sure this is a development I'm, completely sort of uplifted by, because I'm actually, I'm in the present of the story where everybody seems to be dying. They've just done all sorts of things I didn't expect them to do, and the muddy clay on the floor that's everybody's sliding in is about to hit the fan and splatter those that are still alive, which aren't many. So it's good, and it's well done. And I love the fact that it is something that is a really special cliffhanger for a lot of people. But I think I prefer the second one, which is just a traditional "you're too late, Doctor," and of course also because it's accompanying monsters rising from the sea, which I rather love. So I'm going to be much more in the next episode into the resolution of the army story, the Russians, the vampires, and all of that than I think I am in the Doctor's ancient battle with Fenric. But I know other people, really like that, delving into the Doctor's past and, invoking an enemy that the Doctor's been fighting all through time. That is of less interest to me because it's new lore. Do you know what I mean? That's why. But I might change my mind, because I've changed my mind on a few things as I've been watching this, especially the Cockney vampires, who I didn't like at all. I'm afraid I didn't change my mind on Ace trying to be all sexy with a man made of mahogany. Yeah, he's got the wood, but that's his performance. And as I say, he's a good actor, but I think it's so restricted with what you can do at that time in that kind of program. And it's a brave effort, but I think but I'm afraid it makes me laugh, which is bad of me. But maybe it's because I'm not, sexy stuff is never really my kind of thing, and quite often it just sort of bores me. But there, at least I get some entertainment going, well, bless them, they had a bash. My favourite thing, though, well, I love. I've already chosen Russians, haven't I? Because I love all the stuff with Captain Sorin. I do love Captain Sorin. He's such a good character. And I love his speech about the vampires. I love his bit where he says to his men, "Come in like the wolves of winter." And they go, "Oh, that's the code. We've got to get out of here." I even like the way that when the Doctor rescues him, he sort of rather gamely sort of goes, "Oh," and leaps off where he's been sitting. I think the confrontation between the Doctor and Ace is very good. Although, as I say, I do think there are restrictions there with the performance, which do hamper. It doesn't play to the strongest suit that Sylvester has, which I think is, that sort of melancholy that he does so beautifully, and the sort of scatty natural eccentricity he has. I think when he's trying to be, fierce and dramatic, it's not a comfortable voice/face for him as some of the other stuff that I think sits with him much more naturally as a performer. Nick Mallet, I think, deserves credit for some of those beautiful shots. The monsters on the beach in the mist. The dead Wainwright. Oh, I love that scene where they lock the soldiers in who've been brave. I even love just the soldiers going click click. We're gonna be brave. But Millington's speech about we had to seal it off to save the ship. And in the way he just sort of delivers it as if to say that's what we're doing, and then buggers off. and that's when it, the episode really ramps up, and I think those final few minutes of the episode, you're going, God, this is Doctor Who. This was, this is a different league from the Doctor Who that has fallen short of this sort of drama, and that I imagined old Doctor Who was like all of the time, which of course it wasn't. But it was, it was so exciting being a doctor, and I'd come back from a parents' evening, so my disappointment that I'd missed and my recording forever. I would never have the opening of the title sequence, and it slightly sullied it for me. But I had it in the past where friends of mine had taped the show for me instead, but their video had been a different video to mine, and then it gave it a different hue, and that jarred as well. I mean, I was so desperate for everything to be, we had first generation, we had off air. It was so important that you had those things, because when we're so used to watching bad quality videos, the chance that you would get to record something off air and that would be your quality copy of the episode was actually very, very important, because I think one enjoyed stories less if they were on really, really grimy quality. And I have to say now, every time there's a remaster, you watch an episode again and you watch it fresh, and it opens up all sorts of things about the episode. I think the bit that sums up the episode most to me is Captain Sorin's speech about the vampires and all that stuff with the vampires on the beach walking through the mist. And the coming over the grave. So the sort of vampire, hemovory, misty vibe, which I'm going to also rather cheat and have Captain Sorin's speech that kind of sums all that stuff up as well. So any of those things, I get a point. I mean, judging by last time, Alan's probably going to choose the sexy scene. I love the bit where Ace leans on a hut and goes, "Ooh," to a man. Let's see what he says.
For the third episode, it's got to be the way they use the Norse mythology and Ultima together. So you've got what was then cutting-edge science with an obvious reference to the breaking of the Enigma Code with Ultima, and you've also got Yggdrasil, the World Tree, and all that ancient Norse mythology, and they're all muddled together, a brilliant science fantasy concept. And of course, the machine is called Ultima, which is a sly little reference, I think, to Ultima Thule, which was what the Romans used to call the area beyond the end of the world. And of course, it's the end of the world is Ragnarok. So there's a little double play on meanings there, which I really rather like.
Oh, now I didn't know that. Every day is a school day. Thanks, Alan. And also, if one was as bright as one thought one might have been when one was younger, Enigma, Ultima, that's another reason it's the Ultima machine, not the ultimate machine. I'm so ashamed. Why am I telling you? That could have died with my teenage self. Please, there be somebody else out there who thought it was called the ultimate machine. The ultimate machine. It's the ultimate machine. That's a wrestler's name, isn't it? And now the ultimate machine. But I like that about the it also being a reference to something else, and that's very. I mean, I hadn't really thought of that, or it occurred to me, but I definitely like what Alan says there about the fact that the Norse mythology and the technology in the brand new for the time technology in the story sort of combine to to resonate with the plot and to move it along and to be so. There's a bit of they're not just there for plot purposes. They kind of there's a tonal thing, there's a thematic thing. It works on a number of different levels, which is all good. It's a really well thought out concept and script, and everyone's worked very hard on this. And when one is a lot of art and creativity, I always really appreciate it when I see that what I'm watching is the result of people, being. Especially on a show that, frankly, they didn't need to because nobody liked it. The bosses didn't give a monkeys about it. The producer. I'm not criticizing John Nathan Turner here, but he would have been happy with stories that didn't have quite, I think, the level of depth that they're being given by Andrew Cartmel and his bevy of writers, who I think have ambition to try and do something different, and it doesn't always work. And as I say, as the target audience as a kid, the oddbally stuff and some of the tone of some of the stuff didn't work for me, and I got quite cross. But again, I think I'm as much to blame for that as anything else. But seeing as how the show could have been and where it could have gone and the directions that it was going in when Andrew Cartmel took over, I now think, I really appreciate the fact that they didn't just sort of rock up to work and go, it's just, have a laugh. They really worked hard, and they had lofty ambitions. They had serious intent, which for an unloved corner of the television landscape, and as a viewer, I really appreciate the fact that everyone, is digging in and doing as well as they can, with circumstances and equipment and resources that make that a lot harder. So, and that's what makes for a great Doctor Who story, is that everybody comes together and produces something that's greater than the sum of its parts could ever dream of being. But that also has cool hero moments and monsters and aborted attempts at sexiness. It's got it all. Well done, Doctor Who. So let's play the contest again. I was going to do a lead into next week, but actually I'm going to play the contest first with Mr. Andrew Cartmel, who is going to tell us what his thoughts are on episode 3, including his favourite thing. Will it be Alan's, the combination of Norse mythology and new technology, or the sort of rather nebulous Sorin speech, vampires, misty fang that's going on? Let's go and see Andrew in the future. Oh, episode 3 was a hard one. Episode 3 was a really hard one. I sort of cheated. I loved Captain Sorin's speech about 6 months ago. There was a mission in German-occupied Romania, and a man started talking about vampires. And I love all the stuff of the hemivores on the beach, and so I suppose it kind of covers the vampire side of things. But I loved all of those visuals and the fact that he alludes to something. There's something, isn't there, about legend and the past that gives you're telling a science fiction story, but you're using the tropes of horror. And horror is, of course, scarier than science fiction, because something ancient and fusty somehow makes us more scared than something shiny and futuristic.
Primal and mythic, yeah. That's Briggs all over too. He's a very knowledgeable guy. He's very scholarly, and so he's drawing on deep sources, deep roots.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think what Alan chose.
Oh, he's not here. It doesn't matter what he thought.
I only did it minutes ago. Anyway, what? Oh, no, I'll tell you what it was. He likes the synthesis of the brand new technology of the Ultima machine and the Norse mythology, and the idea that the story is telling of a sort of clash and of those two things.
And the way that those things interlock, overlap, and interpenetrate, which again is the sheer genius of Ian Briggs.
Well, there was me forgetting something that had happened literally minutes before. But there we go. Hopefully this podcast will stay with you longer than anything manages to cling to my addled brain, which seems to be dropping things very, very quickly these days. Unlike a barnacle on a hemovore's face, nothing seems to stick in the Haydock noggin anymore. But I hope what sticks with you is a sense of enjoyment of this Doctor Who story and some insights from its script editor, Andrew Cartmel, and there'll be more of this celebration of the Gothic and the terrifying in the next instalment of Happy Times and Places, which sees the chains of Fenric shatter for the very last time. Well, except for then the special edition and the special extended edition and all that. We play the contest again. Happy Times and Places listeners, hello. It's time for the final part of the Curse of Fenric, which there was a rumour before it started that they were trying to get it extended to be a 5th episode. That was the word of mouth at the time, was that they'd shot so much material. So I think expectations were pretty high for this one already. I think there was a feeling that this was, a pretty epic kind of adventure. Even though, Ian Briggs had written, well, Dragonfire had been the winner of the season poll that year. Dragonfire's had an interesting journey, hasn't it? Because I think it was the one that was felt to be most like traditional Doctor Who. Had a Nazi-like villain, and a monster in the ice and all of that sort of stuff. So I think I think we all, when we were desperate for new Doctor Who to be like old Doctor Who, it was the one that everyone gravitated towards as being the best because it was the most like old Doctor Who, and it certainly won the season poll, didn't it? Whereas now I think it's sort of dropped down a little bit because actually, what works best about season 24 is a lot of the stuff that we reacted against at the time, because it was a tonal shift that seemed to go against what we sort of, Hinchcliffe and Holmes and Pertwee nostalgists, sort of wanted, which was, something that seemed a bit more sort of serious and gothic, or at least action-packed and military. But actually now looking at season 24, I think Delta is probably the one that works the best because it mixes the sort of zany adventure, with fast-paced, fun, frothy, slightly crazy adventure. And Paradise Towers, I think, has ambitions to do something a little bit different. But I don't think anyone was necessarily thinking that the combination of somebody who'd written for season 24 and the director of Paradise Towers, which I think a lot of people felt that the execution was its problem. I think it's a bit more complicated than that. And nobody's wild about Mysterious Planet when talking about Trial of a Time Lord. So I think it's quite fun. I like the Crotons, so therefore I like the Mysterious Planet, because it's essentially the same story. But I think we're all surprised at what was pulled out of the hat with this. But this isn't the penultimate episode, episode 4. It is the final episode, and I think I imagined all the sort of epic scenes that we were missing, and then actually when the special edition comes along, there's some good stuff in there. But I still love it. I still love the original 4 parts, and consider those the definitive versions, really. And I will watch the others as a curio, as an addition. But I think there's nothing to apologise for in these 4 episodes. And so I know everyone likes the "everything stops for tea" line, which I think is quite fun. But I don't think it's a huge loss. It's quite grim, isn't it? But anyway, listen up. Let us now watch episode 4 of The Curse of Fenric, and I'm going to press play in 3, 2, 1. Oh yes, I have had time Corey Pullman. I'd looked her up the other week, and I wondered I couldn't remember why I'd looked her up the other week. I was thinking Pullman. It's because she's the daughter of the actress Barbara Young, who died, as I record this, relatively recently. Although probably relatively, I think Pink's Let This Party Started is a relatively recent song, and I discovered to my cost that there are probably people who are allowed to vote that were being born when it was being played on the radio. But so what I think of as recent, I think of this as recent, but I think she's died within the past 12 months. Barbara Young was the wife of Jack Pullman, who wrote I, Claudius, and I couldn't think of it. I was thinking, there aren't any famous, apart from Corey Feldman. Corey Pullman, Corey Feldman. Corey Feldman is not the wife of Corey Feldman. Why would she be? Or Marty Feldman. Pullman, Feldman. Right, they're all related. Marty Feldman, Corey Feldman, and Corey Pullman are all in it. I don't know what they're doing. But anyway, Jack Pullman, who wrote I, Claudius, is Corey Pullman's father. So she is from a showbiz family, but I don't think she's acting anymore. She has done a few events recently, but I think she's good in this, and I think the Ace and her mother subplot is an interesting one. But here the story takes on another leap. I always think this episode, or this part of the episode, has a slightly different colour palette. It's like it's been graded slightly differently, but that might just be because of the signal when it was broadcast at my house and the copy that I had when I'd videoed it. But again, I love that this era does things like this a lot, where nothing really happens in this scene, but it's a mood scene, her singing to the baby, and it's a bit like the bit in Ghostlight where Catherine Sessinger just sings a song on the piano. that it's attempting to not just go, here's a series of storytelling scenes, but let's have some mood, let's have some character, and that the speed at which all this moves, and that's great with the window smashing and the paper flying about, and this is really harsh. I love this. Shoot! He just comes in, shoot them, and he says, "What for?" And then he says, "Because I order you to." I mean, that everything. Bates is a good guy, but he can't disobey an order. But at least he does the kind of what for, and this is really grim. These are good guys. These are British soldiers doing as they're told. I like it. Let's just get this over with. I like Captain, and I quite like that Captain Bates starts to get a little bit more to do, because, as I say, he was an actor that seemed to be of the moment and playing a bit of a small part, all things considered. But it shows how Doctor Who was kind of upcasting in those days and attracting lots of good young talent and good young handsome talent. I have to say, it's quite a sexy cast, isn't it, of young people? I love this scene as well. I think the intensity with which Alfred Lynch does it. I don't understand why some people and the lightning on his face. I love that. I think that's a brilliant scene. It's really unsettling, and it's giving it the sort of epic oomph, and it's showing Millington's plan coming to a head, and him being totally kind of fixated on this ancient thing that is going to bring about the end of the world. Well done for moving in unison, ladies. And I love all of this. This stuff's very well done. All the battle stuff, and the rain, really gives it a kind of all hell's broken loose. The heavens have opened and all hell's broken loose. Do those things go together, or is that just me getting two metaphors and trying to make it sound like a plan? God, I think these poor girls must have absolutely frozen doing this. The fact that they're even vaguely vampiric, I think, is to their credit. Raymond Trickett, as the ancient team of all, had been a prison officer in EastEnders. When Den went to prison, I think there were 3 prison officers. There was Jeremy Young, Cal, Neil Dalgleish, Damon, from Arc of Infinity, and Raymond Trickett, or maybe Raymond Trickett was a prison officer when somebody else had been to prison. But I don't know. I seem to remember all my EastEnders prison officers. But I've not seen him in much since. Dinsdale Landon does this wonderfully. Have I told the Dinsdale Landon story about... He does that really, really well. And don't interrupt me while I'm used. It's slightly comical, but that's okay. But I like the sort of blinking eyes thing he's got as well. And it may be partially just because he's got contact lenses in, but it's also a suggestion because he hasn't got Judson's glasses on anymore, and maybe the physical form that he's got, it's still, he might have mended the legs, but maybe he hasn't completely reconnected the retina, or maybe you can regenerate. You can overcome paralysis but not glaucoma. I don't know, it's just, I think it's a nice little touch. It's a reminder that this is not necessarily a stable vessel that he's in. I have to say, it's I quite like the fact that this deadly poison gas is so deadly that you can just put a bin on it and then do sort of funny dialogue while it's still in the room. But again, some of this is a sort of drama convention, and it's moving at a lick, and that's a great gag as well. I'd have stuck some dynamite under the desk at Uek, and again, I can't think of anyone better to be sort of throwing themselves around in the mud and the rain than the Seventh Doctor and Ace, because the two actors are so committed, and that's really important for sort of keeping up the pace and the energy. And sometimes videotaped drama can be a bit stilted, and if you've ever tried to make a drama on, I know they have slightly better quality equipment, but if you've ever tried to make anything on your own video cameras, it's making everything sort of flow is actually really hard, and keeping the pace and the energy, and when you're cutting from scene to scene without it sort of being jarring or being clunky or episodic, and the actors help with that. Here's another bit of kind of I like the way it actually cuts just from the screen when you don't see anything. That's very effective. This is pretty grim. The chemical warfare. I mean, we're the good guys, and this is horrible. What are we doing? That's against the Geneva Convention, isn't it? And that brings another dimension to the story. That what are we? It ties back to that scene in episode 2. What are we prepared to do? And of course, conventions in warfare seems very oxymoronic, but it's stuff that's worth considering, especially in something that I find very appealing. Gung ho, boys' own action adventure type of stuff. It behoves us to have an element that goes, as the Third Doctor said to Codell, amongst all the stories of bravery, don't glorify it. It's pretty grim. And I love all of this. This is all and then I'll ruin that by going, I love the bit where they cock their guns and go off to be brave. And yes, and I love the fact that Captain Bates gets his bit, because he's sort of been on the periphery, and as I say, he was an actor that I was quite interested in, and then you get that bit where the back of his head comes into shot, and this is his sort of hero moment, and I like that I always like it when a sort of a peripheral character, suddenly gets a bit where they get to sort of take center stage, or just do their little bit that helps to chip the story towards victory, where people either change sides or have a change of heart or dig deep to do something that you wouldn't expect them to do. That's those are the moments to me that make adventure stories and that sort of make things like Doctor Who more so than things that it can't do, like big spaceship battles and that sort of thing. It relies on the humanity and the people and all of that. I like that as well. I bought it cheap in the market, and I remember I did manage to get hold of a few Russian military badges, because I went to Russia with the school. There was a school trip to Russia, and I don't know if I got the badges there. I think people did on the streets. You'd give them your Western gloves for military badge. And it was quite humbling. I think I talked about that in the first episode. I mean, again, and here's another example of that. I shall duck down, and you shall crowd over me. It's I mean, that's the third time that's happened in this story. And as I say, it is a sort of, but it made it, and you can read it as going, well, he was so mesmerized by these, vampire medusoid type, these creatures that have sort of paralyzed him with fear, but it never quite works, that paralyzed fear, because you just end up looking stupid. It always looks more convincing if somebody tries to make a bolt for it and is sort of grabbed and killed, but it's so hard to do with videotape drama and again in a set you can't remove walls from and all of that sort of stuff. I think maybe they could have done with that, but they wouldn't have had the time. This, however, is great because it has I mean, we still have the I'm ducking down and you're just leaving, but they go, let's have Judson. I love the fact that Fenric, who's this evil creature from the Torn of Time, kind of goes, and I've killed this guy and I'm inhabiting his body, but for him, I'm going to kill this woman who's patronized him for the past God knows how long. And it's, and it's grim because everyone starts dying. Nurse Crane's a sort of peripheral character, which is extraordinary to think of. Anne Reid, isn't it? Whose career has, gone through the roof since then. And I mean, she'd always been around, but, actors are, and had done good work and had done notable work, but was still, when Doctor Who approaches her and goes, it's only a few lines here and there, it goes, well, yeah, I'll do it, which I don't think she would do now. She was the sort of guest lead when she returned to Doctor Who in Smith and Jones, so that's always nice. That's why all actors carry on, you see, because there's always that hope. You go, I still haven't made it at 50, but you go, yeah, but I could play Falstaff at 70. It's the hope that's the killer, really. But Fenric sort of going, yeah, I'm gonna toy. It's really sadistic, actually, the death of Nurse Crane, and then when it cuts to that sort of malevolent Cheshire Cat smile at the end, that's absolutely terrific. And this is all great, the smashing of the wind. I love all of that under siege, anything that's got a sort of under siege element. We batten down the hatchets, and hammer hammer planks to the windows because they can't get in, and then when they do get in, and you go, right, we've got to just run for it now. You know that the sanctuary is gone now, and I've never minded this that. You know, she only knows one address in London at this time, which is her nan's address. She knows where her nan lived in the war. I can totally believe that. She might have read letters or whatever. You know, it does rely on a bit of a coincidence, but it doesn't offend me. This, I think, partially because, you know, there might be a suggestion that a lot of this stuff's been manipulated by Fenric in time and whatever. But I think it's actually pleasing thematically. It works for those characters. And unfortunately, we knew Jean and Phyllis were going to die, because this had been done on the bane of Doctor Who, Open Air. Was it Open Air? No, Fast Forward. It was one of those. Was it? Gosh, I think it was presented by Philip Schofield, the presenter who dare not speak his name as I currently record this. You know, they showed a sort of special effects behind the scenes going, and this is the scene where Jean and Phyllis die. So I think from the minute they came into it, I was waiting for Jean and Phyllis to die. And I remember, you know, when episode 3 finished and they still weren't dead, it was like, oh, they've given away something from episode 4. That weather looks vile, and it's really good because it really adds to it. And sometimes sort of grey weather can make an effect. I never think the Stones of Blood really benefits from the sort of grey drabness of that videotape, but I think the greyness here really sort of adds to it. Yeah, Jean and Phyllis's death being revealed on that program, it did seem a sort of a spoiler too early. But of course, you have to get your show in the papers. So not in the papers, you know, you have to, in the pre-publicity. But I don't think. I don't think we'd do that now. Although that said, we did have the human Dalek on that. Anyway, it's poor old Commander Millington. The story sort of doesn't know what to do with him now. He just keeps sort of running into the room of the Ultima Machine and seeing who's there to shoot, and then running out again. And you know what? The fact that he didn't finish Vershinin off, he sort of goes a little bit careless. But he is a bit barking, and that. Death is not a great death for the character of Millington, but the story sort of moved on beyond him, and now we have the bromance between Captain Bates and Vershinin, and that Vershinin's sort of moment of killing Millington is pretty cool, you know. But I do, and I'm sad that Big Finish. Oh, actually, hang on. Let's pause to praise Dinsdale Landon here. He's done a terrific job. I still don't think I've told you my Dinsdale Landon story, have I? I keep starting to tell it. I might have told it in episode 1, which I did a while ago, because there's been a gap between episode 1 and these 3. But I like the Bates and Vershinin thing, and I do think there's definitely a spin-off series in Captain Bates and Vershinin, you know, being bravely adventurous and not quite having the courage to declare their love for each other, and eventually, you know, perhaps being, you know, gay icons, you know, as they learn that, you know, as they fought against Fenric in the war, they can fight against the expectations of society in the late 40s and early 50s. But Dinsdale Landon does that bit where he can't think of the solution brilliantly. Bates, when his hair's wet, Bates does look a bit 80s there, but they are a handsome couple, aren't they? I'm sure there are other podcasters, Joe Ford, who might be able to sort of describe the vibe of Bates and Vershinin more than cishet white guy, cishet Haydock. And this is and I like this because they've dropped the English thing, you know, early, going, you know, we have to speak English for the mission, and so that the viewers home can understand us. But they've sort of emphasised that and made it part of, you know, those opening scenes, and it comes back to bite Sorin in the arse. It's like, oh no, you know, the whole English thing. That's because you are English, because you are part of this, and that look that Landon gives is absolutely brilliant. And I'm so sad. Workers of the world unite, and yes, do you want to go to heaven? I'm so sad that Captain Sorin dies. I think that's really sad and horrible, because I wanted him to be, you know, I suppose I kind of knew that he was never gonna, you know, because him and Ace had this thing. I just thought they might sadly wave each other off at the end. And it's funny again, isn't it, that because they've rightly and brilliantly cast, I think Tomek Bork is Polish, isn't he? But an actor with a genuine accent and the language, it means we now have, you know, an Eastern European, you know, Russian sounding whatever, Fenric, which, because of course that's the actor's accent, and again it's moving away from going all monsters have to speak RP, but it did feel slightly dissonant at the time, because you're going, oh, it's a shame, yeah, because the actor can't do a RP, it means it's a compromise. But of course, no, it's fine. What if an actor, an ancient alien god in the body of a Russian soldier can have a Russian accent in the same way that in the body of a classically trained Dinsdale Landon, it sounds like the classically trained Dinsdale Landon. Why is one right and why is one not? I only mention it because of the things that seemed to not like the Cockney vampires, and it's sort of my own snobbishness and our own assumptions about, you know, what people should sound like on television, and things have changed since. And actually, one of the more refreshing things about New Who is there is a much bigger array of voices and accents, and it gives it much more verisimilitude. Much as I actually do like the RP, enunciation, slightly theatrical aspect to the acting and performances of 50s, 60s, and 70s television. It's all different, isn't it? And it's all good in its own way and in different ways, and I love it all. And just because one is different from the other, it doesn't mean you can't like both. This is really cool. I remember my music and drama teacher, Mr. Knight, saying Doctor Who was really harsh last night, that the idea of the Doctor calling his companion an emotional cripple, he thought was really tricky and difficult television, and he thought, that was an extraordinary thing for a program to be. It was interesting because that hadn't struck me at the time as being unusual. I think there were quite mature conversations that went on in House Haydock when I was younger, when I was youngest of four, and my mum's quite a sort of blunt woman and a woman of the medical profession, and so sort of language like that we didn't strike me as particularly harsh or unnecessary. But I think he felt that in a young person's drama, that very concept of being and the phraseology. Now the phraseology is now slightly different as well, because the word cripple is one that you wouldn't really use because of its echoes to disability and all other stuff. But the way that the Doctor is manipulating the situation, this is really brave stuff to do with, especially with this most sort of clownish of all Doctors, to make it. Now we know he's only doing it because he says later to make her lose. Oh, that's really that's really horrible. That actually got me. It's it is a slightly, because of the blocking of it and everything, the fall to the floor is a slightly theatrical thing, but actually the force of the emotion and the concept of what the Doctor doing is pretty intense and grim stuff. Well done, Doctor Who. These are bold areas to be going. But I am sad for Captain Sorin. And the Doctor has had to make some pretty harsh choices in order to get to the end of this. I mean, there's no great big there are explosions, but it's ended by people talking in a room. But the addition of fire and explosion. Look at that! I mean, they've just kept it up. They must be absolutely soaked and miserable, and you can't do that in more than one take. I find that wow. I've got quite emotional at that, but because I'm having to talk about it as well. But just thinking of the sort of emotional impact that what the Doctor has done on Ace there, and what your parental or loved figure can do, the cruelty that they can dispense, and of course the Doctor has done that for the greater good, but the ends justify the means. I mean, what she's been through there, I think is, and Sophie Aldred does it very well. But bravo, Doctor Who, because I think that's, and as I say, I was much more interested in the explosions and the vampires and all of that at the time, and especially maybe because Ace was a girl, and so I wasn't that bothered. But actually, I think that's really struck me this time of where they're going, their ambition for what to do with the companion, the maturity and the complexity of what they're doing with the Doctor's treatment of Ace there. I think is exceptional. And God bless Sophie Aldred. I mean, diving in there, it looks like there's loads of rocks that you could scratch yourself on, but also really bloody cold, and diving. Just she's so game. She's such an asset to the show in terms of what she brings to it in terms of energy and all of that sort of thing. I sometimes don't think the line readings are great, but I think she. I think both of them have that sometimes with their line readings, but in terms of their energy and their bond and their commitment, they're a real pair, these two. And I've learnt to love them a lot more than I did as a kid, I have to say. And I think that's because I appreciate what they're bringing rather than worrying about. I used to get really fed up with Ace's modern slang stuff and the professor joke, and I used to get cross with Sylvester because of the gurning and the spitting when it should be sort of dramatic, but I again, you sort of cast off a lot of that and appreciate them for what they bring, which is all those things I said, the bond, the energy, the commitment, the physicality, and as I say, what the boldness with which the scripting and the script editor, I presume, I'll talk to him about it very, very shortly, of having quite a sort of mature take on what we're doing to the companion and what, how these travels in time are affecting them, not just in terms of adventure, but sort of at a deeper level, and sort of, and how that then is reflected metaphorically in the subject matter of the storylines. It's that's ambitious, that's bright, that's smart, and that's bold, and that's I think above and beyond the call of duty for what this program was at the time and how it was seen at the time, and even what I wanted from it. I appreciate that much more now, that particular aspect, to the extent that I think I was going to go, oh, my favourite thing of episode 4 is the Bates and Vashinin, Bates's little subplotty bit, or I love that bit of Millington, battlefield shall stretch 100 leagues. I love Dinsdale Landon's performance as Judson / Fenric. I think, by the way, the chess game stuff is rubbish. It's almost like, it's the sort of MacGuffin. How do I solve this chess puzzle? Well, I don't play by the rules of chess. Well, you can't do that. That's not how you solve a logic puzzle. You go, if a train traveling there is going that far and a train traveling there is going that far, how come this train gets there first? Because they get off the train and get an aeroplane. You can't just suddenly bring something up elsewhere. How do you solve this chess puzzle? You do it by not adhering to the rules of chess. So that is a load of old nonsense, but it doesn't really matter because it gives us that lovely bit with the workers of the world unite and all of that, which when you're a young kid who's being all political, you're going, oh yeah, cool, Doctor Who, well done, they've done an anti-nuclear story and now they're workers of the world are uniting, and oh, isn't that all cool? So I loved all of that, but also it gives those peripheral characters their moment to shine, which when Doctor Who always does that, I'm always grateful. I love it in Russell T Davies stories where the humble people on the shop floor all get together to do a bit that, helps Doctor Who or overcomes a baddie. I've just been watching Tortured Children of Earth, and I love it when the Welsh people on their housing estate all start rocking the car of the people keeping Yanto's sister under surveillance so that she can make an escape. I love it like that, when it just sort of shows we can all, even people that we'd write off or were slightly ne'er-do-wells, we've all got it in us to do a heroic bit, and it can be quite fun. And I love all of that. I love it when it shows that when everyone's important and everyone can do a good thing and everyone can find something in themselves to help out a Doctor Who story. I love that. So yeah, it's fine. It's a MacGuffin, isn't it? But I love the Curse of Fenric. I feel duty bound to point out that it's the solution to the chess problem. And also, I also have to say, the battle between two creatures from the dawn of time that involves vast death and cataclysms and the heavens opening and dangerous undercurrents and the rise of the vampires is all because he's set him he's sort of gone, you know, if a man is found in or who am I? Yes, who am I? I'm born on Tuesday, woken on Wednesday. You know, it's just one of those sort of it's a sort of hoary old puzzle that you'd have thought was clever when you were sort of 8, and you sort of go, and that's how the Doctor has trapped Fenric. He's sort of set him it does seem a little bit sort of prosaic, but then again, one of the things I love about Doctor Who is its juxtaposition of the highfalutin and the otherworldly and the deep and meaningful and the universal with something as mundane as a police box, you know, or a kid in a gas mask and all that. But I do think there is something pathetic, about the fact that the whole reason this great big time being is in change is because it couldn't work out a logic puzzle with a chess set. But I do like that speech saying he pulled bones out of the sand and carved them into chess pieces. I love all of that. That's all quite mythical and nice. And the Doctor having chess pieces that he's made of bones, I think, is, you know, all adds to that atmosphere. But then they've just got a sort of army chess set, and I don't think it bears thinking about too much. But anyway, that's fine. So I feel it's been said to me a couple of times, you know, in accentuating the positive, you sometimes, you know, you can still acknowledge some of the weaknesses, and I do think that's really silly. But the commitment of everybody to everything means it sort of gets away with it, and is fine. It's not really what it's about, you know. It's the conduit to tell the story of those characters that we meet, and you know, the relationship between Ace and the Doctor, all of which is, you know, fantastically done. And so surprisingly to me, despite all of the sort of stuff I like about the story and the setting and those characters, and I'm always much more interested really in the new people we meet in a Doctor Who story than I am about the Doctor and the companion. I always tend to think of them as a conduit. I don't want my heroes to sort of to cry or have something that they're going to hold over to too many episodes, because I want you to take me to a new world and us immerse ourselves in this new and exciting place, not, you know, have your, you know, the things that you've been dragging, your emotional baggage, if you like, that you've been dragging around with you. As much, you know, that's the stuff that interests me less, although I can understand its importance, and actually it's what's made the new series work. And so actually a lot of what I do like about the new series is that continuity stuff that means that when that comes to a head at the end of the season, it's a big oomph. So it's interesting, isn't it, how one can think one doesn't go for a thing, and then that thing actually really speaks to one when it's done by different people or is in a different guise. But anyway, maybe it's because of that. Maybe it's because I've been really enjoying the new series, and, you know, since The Curse of Fenric was on in 1989, Doctor Who has sort of, you know, developed, but it has developed, you know, as I've said before, you know, it could, you know, the Cartmel era can perhaps, you know, credit itself with going, well, you know, we did start the ball rolling with some of that stuff. And I'm not saying that Russell T Davies, who is, you know, what I really need to do is pick up from some of the thematic and character development style of the show that was so successful it was axed and everybody thought was rubbish. But it just seems to be that, you know, if you want to see patterns in Doctor Who, I think that's a reasonable one to see, that there is that it's not like it's a totally different show despite the, you know, the decades apart, and that's quite pleasing actually, that you know, that the chain still has a link in it, even though it's, you know, it's perhaps one that's been sort of quite stretched. It hasn't entirely shattered. But that means that watching that this time, I did get a sort of lump in my throat when Ace, you know, when Ace's faith in the Doctor was destroyed, and it was more because of what I knew that was doing to her. That's a horrible thing to feel. I've had incidents in my life, and I sort of say that they're a bit like they make you like a broken vase, again, sort of appropriate to the Curse of Fenric. You're shattered and you can be glued together, but you'll never quite hold water again, no matter how much you keep trying to pour it in as you continue the rest of your life. And I think that those scars that Ace carries with her from her. From the life that has been hinted at has been difficult and dangerous, and you can read subtext into what sort of things she might have gone through as a kid, and what her teenage years have done to her, and then having that having the Doctor be a sort of safe haven, and have then him deliberately, almost malevolently sever that again, as we discover, for the greater good. But that that hurts, as well as in a story where she's met this nice guy who's turned out to be killed by an ancient chess playing time beast, and she's also changing and developing herself, and that's all tied in with the nature. I love all of that. I've been watching The White Lotus recently, where the sea and the environment ties us in with the ancient times, and there is something about the elements there, which is why the rain and the water and the mud and all of that stuff grounds the story in the earth. And that, again, like vampires, like old things, are quite terrifying, because they remind us that we're just a very short blip on this earth, and that people who were as alive and vital as we were only 100 years ago are all anyone that was my age 100 years ago, or even 18, my age when I watched this 100 years ago, when I so young, and the whole world was ahead of me, and everything I could feel and smell and taste and touch everything, and life was surreal to me. All of that's gone in 100 years' time. Not only gone, dust, nothing to show for it. Which I think and there's something about tying stuff up with the earth and the elements that therefore is, again, rather scary and rather terrifying, and it makes things feel big and epic at the same time as making us feel small and vulnerable, but also tied in with nature, because and Ace's burgeoning sensuality and all that sort of thing is tied in with the invigoration of the water, and the clashing of the elements, and the powerful movements of cumulus and stratospheres and all of that sort of stuff. I think all of that stuff is really interesting. And so my favourite bit of episode 4 is the emotional severing of the Doctor, and her cleansing herself with by diving in at the end, which was not stuff that I have to say was my headline news at all when I watched and rewatched this story when it first went out. So well done, the passage of time, and well done this process, which has enabled me to rethink it. And my favourite thing overall, well, I mean, Nick Mallet as a director deserves an awful lot of credit. Ian Briggs as a scriptwriter deserves an awful lot of credit. I mean, both of those, I think, deserve a vote. But I can only choose one thing, can't I? And Marquez's music, Andrew Cartmel's script editor. This is very much his vision, one of his visions of the show, or it ties in with his multi-vision of the show. But I'm going to have to be personal. I love the cast for this story. I think they're all excellent. It would be too much just to choose Landon, who's brilliant, Lynch, who's brilliant, but I even like what Stephen Rimkus does and Marek Anton does with the smaller parts. Nicholas Parsons is amazing, and what a revelation. And I loved Captain Sorin. He was such a favourite character of mine, and I love the fact that all the Russians were played by actors using their genuine accents, the principal ones anyway. It just felt real. So I'm going to choose the cast. It's a very lazy one, but because actors are my thing and acting is my thing. But I didn't choose any of the cast in episodes 1 to 4. But I feel Briggs and Mallet both lose out there, because if this had been 5 episodes or 6 episodes, I think both of them. And it's not often I choose the writer, and it's not often I choose the director. and it has to be special circumstances for me to do, because I just think that's a bit too all-encompassing and a bit too. And I like to acknowledge them, of course, and perhaps wrap them up with the things that I choose. But I think perhaps if this had been 6 parts, my 5th thing would have been the writer, my 6th would have been the director. But because I've only got 1 left to go, I'm going to choose the cast. Let's see what Allan chooses as his 4th thing and his bonus.
And fourthly, what do I like about the 4th episode? It's the way it reveals that this series of Doctor Who has got an arc plot. Now, we're used to that these days, but in classic Doctor Who, it's exceptionally rare for there to be an arc plot. It was done sometimes. You had the Black Guardian trilogy, or you had the Key to Time, which is an arc plot, because the whole series is one story told in various different vignettes. But yeah, the arc plot with Lady Painfort and Ace saving her own future and all that sort of thing. So that people credit Babylon 5 with inventing the arc plot, but this is Doctor Who doing it 4 years previously and better. So there we go. And I have a bonus thing that I love about the story, and that has got to be the cast. It's exceptional, and there's great strength in depth in this cast as well. From Nicholas Parsons, stunt cast as the whiskey priest who's ripped off from Stephen King's Salem's Lot, and does, I still think, a really good performance in that role. And then you've got Dinsdale Landon is brilliant as the Alan Turing character. Sylvester McCoy is really getting a handle on the character here, and here in Remembrance of the Daleks, his best performances, I think. And Sophie Aldred's Ace is multi-dimensional to a degree that she's never been before in the series, I think. So yeah, and you get a young Anne Reid, of course, as well, who comes full circle with us to get back as a hemivore in a later episode. So there you go, a little slide dig there as well from Russell T Davies, I think. So those are the things I love about Curse of Fenric. There are more, but those are the ones I've highlighted for this particular podcast. I hope you agree with me, even if it's not one of your favourites, that it's a very effective gothic horror episode series of Doctor Who with some very nice production values, unusually for the time. And it says here, finally, shamelessly plug anything I have coming up, and that is going to be a weekly podcast with Tony Slattery and a good friend of mine, Alex Leam, and Paul Carmichael, who's a Shakespearean actor. So that's going to be on Fridays, and if you want to watch out for it, head to Twitter, and it's @Slattery Podcast, all one word. Thanks for listening to my ramblings. Now for Toby's. Bye-bye.
Allan is a good man. I've a lot to thank Allan for that I won't do publicly, but he's helped me out big time with an issue or two that I needed help with, and so I'm grateful to Allan, and it's good to see him there. I don't see him and Erica often enough, even though they're only in Liverpool. Good friends both. It reminds Anne Reid, of course, in Smith and Jones, she's playing somebody who sucks blood through a straw. Of course she is. I was thinking of Anthony Calf the other day because he's in Empress of Mars, and of course he's in The Visitation, but he's in A Big Finish, and The Big Finish he's in is an Ice Warrior story. Now, as just a complete coincidence, there's no way they were going, we need to cast somebody who's also been in a Doctor Who audio that has the Ice Warriors. It's just how funny that he ended up being, popping into a casting director's head when they were thinking of somebody to be in an Ice Warrior story. No reason for that to happen apart from, and I'm sure the Anne Reid thing is just a massive coincidence. Anne Reid was prime plum casting. She's a movie star and a highly respected actress, and would be a headline-grabbing guest lead in any Doctor Who story these days. But I think it's just a lovely coincidence that she is in one where she's a bloodsucker, but with a straw rather than with breakable fingernails. Anyway, I've got to set up a meeting with the script editor of this story, who I'm going to interview about all 4 episodes of The Curse of Fenric, and let's see what he chooses as his favourite things. So we'll jump forward in time to Andrew Cartmel, and to have a little bonus, because, by the way, I got the cast. My bonus thing, I got the cast. 1 out of 5. Ain't bad. I'll take it. And put that in your flip-flop thingy. And let's see if Andrew is more simpatico with my choices or Alan's choices as we get to the final hurdle and shatter the final of Fenric's chains. And then for the final episode, I quite shocked myself because as a stroppy teenage boy, I wasn't really interested in girls being sad and that sort of thing. And maybe it's because I'm getting older and stuff. And I remember my school teacher, my drama teacher, I mentioned this in the commentary, said, I watched Doctor Who last night. He used the phrase emotional cripple. That's really hard stuff. And I have to say, watching it as an adult now, and as somebody that's, been through emotional things and seen kids having emotional traumas, I have to applaud you for telling a Doctor Who story that's exciting and about Norse mythology and World War II and all that stuff we talked about and vampires. But you've got a really lofty ambition at the center of it, which is to talk about damaged youth and to use some of that not only as a theme for character development, but also as a metaphor with the bubbling water and the undercurrents and all of that. So it's not working just as a character thing, it's working thematically, and it's also working in Doctor Who, which is unusual. And I'd not really been bothered about that as a teenage boy. And watching it again today, I was very mightily impressed with the ambition to do that. And the fact that you pulled it off so well and that she did it so well too.
Well, thinking of symbolism and of subtext, I've just clocked that the two writers who really did that brilliantly on Doctor Who in my tenure were Ian Briggs and Rona Munro, because that happens in Survival too. You've got this fantastic poetic metaphorical approach to talking about sexuality, for instance. And this is sort of what Ian Briggs is doing too. And I'm really quite proud of both those writers. They're extraordinary writers. The emotional cripple, is that when the Doctor is trying to elicit a response from Ace?
Yeah, he deliberately manipulates her into losing her faith in him. Yeah. So the ends are justifying the means, but it's she still has to go through it for real.
Yeah, and I'm quite proud of that. And of course, another thing that we were doing in this was enriching the character of Ace and expanding her backstory, which is because Ace is largely the creation of Ian Briggs. Certainly the fact that she's such a great character, it stems from the fact that Briggs was the first one to write her and to create the phase space of her, so to speak, giving her such a rich background. Yeah, so you went to town on that. Is episode 4 also the one where she vamps the guard on the door?
No, that's episode 3.
That would have been my favorite thing from episode 3, because doesn't she have some kind of relatively speech about being as fast as the hands on the clock or something?
Well, no, the poor guard has to do that line, which I have to say I think he struggles with a little bit, where he sort of goes faster than the second hand on a watch, and it's so
brilliantly written, but perhaps not quite. He didn't quite have the time to deliver it in the comprehending way it needed.
It doesn't quite have. I don't think it quite has the undercurrents that it needs, perhaps, in the delivery. Although she's working her socks off, she does a great job.
Yeah.
Now according to this, we've got 2 minutes left. So
right, get cracking.
Let's get cracking. So, well, thank you, Andrew. Final thoughts, positive, because this is a positive podcast. We both love The Curse of Fenric. We want you to love it. And I hope you think it sort of stands the test of time, because I think it's up there with the greatest of all Doctor Who's.
Well, I do love it, and I especially love Ian, because without Ian Briggs' genius, this would have had none of the enormous richness that it does. And I'm very proud of it.
Good. Well, because neither of us actually, we both mention him a lot, but neither of us actually singled him out. So I feel it's right that you've come on to give him the name check that he deserves. And also,
I'm gonna have to give him an earful about Chekhov.
Well, and you're a busy man, and thanks for your time doing this silly little.
My pleasure. Lovely to see you,
podcast from
Toby.
the corner. And you. What are you up to? Well, you've got a minute to plug what you're up to, so that listeners can avail themselves of it.
Okay, this book has just come out. It's the first in a series about a character called the Paperback Sleuth. It's really good. I've literally just finished the sequel. I've just finished writing the sequel, which will be out probably in about a year's time. Meanwhile, I'm writing the sequel to this, which is my other crime novel series, which is The Final Detective. So I'm spending the rest of my summer this summer. What I did this summer was writing another Final Detective. So those are my 2 series of crime novels. Please borrow them from your library, or buy a copy, or listen to the audiobooks, or get the ebooks. Do please check them out. If you live in London, come to my next play. I don't know when it's going to be on, but it will be on at some point. Please come along to that, my stage play.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Andrew. And you don't need to give your time to this. And it's brilliant that you're still producing fine work and enjoying it.
One last Doctor Who related plug. I have written a book about Doctor Who called Script Doctor, which is worth seeking. If you're a Seventh Doctor fan, it's really worth seeking out.
Yeah, I have it. It's great. And that will have some of the answers to the questions I didn't ask. Well, Andrew, before we get cut off, I'm going to say thanks, mate. Great to see you.
A pleasure. Thanks a lot, Toby.
Well, how fortunate were we to have Andrew as our guide and as a little coda to the normal shenanigans between me and a guest, in this case, Allan Lear. So I'm grateful to both Allan and to Andrew Cartmel, and I hope you've enjoyed revisiting one of Doctor Who's undoubted classics with me here in Happy Times and Places, and I hope to speak to you again soon, perhaps in an extended special edition where we do this all over again, but occasionally everything stops for tea. Thanks very much for listening to this omnibus edition of Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Haydock, and my special guest, Allan Lear. And Allan recorded this when Tony Slattery, the comedian, was still with us. He's since sadly died, but Allan carries on his legacy, so check out Tony Slattery's Rambling Club. That is the podcast that Allan does in honour of Tony and continuing his legacy. I'm grateful to Allan and to the patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Ruben Herfindahl, Stephen Moffat, Peter Burns, James Corey-Smith, Peter Harness, Ronald Hayden, Rob Leonard, Christopher Meredith, Gavin McLean, Richard Straw, Neil Tate, Nick Tedston, Tim Arding, Nigel Bromley, Paul Cook, Richard Chalk, Peter Chamberlain, Grant Davidson, John Deere, Chris Dunford-Kelk, Paul Dunn, El Pandras, Susie Ferguson, and Jason Gorman. The music is by Dave Gates and the artwork by Dylan Patterson. If you would like to support these podcasts, you can do that by going to patreon.com/Toby Haydock, where for as little as £3 a month, you get your name read out on the credits like what I just did there. You get bonus releases, you get advance releases. You're several months ahead with most of the podcast releases. There are also exclusive podcasts, exclusive behind-the-scenes footage from my DVDs and Blu-rays and various Doctor Who-related shenanigans that I get up to, stuff from my archive, and monthly AMAs. Everything is available from the lowest tier, £3 a month. It helps to keep these ad-free as well. So that's at patreon.com/Toby Haydock. You can also offer your support without signing up to a monthly obligation by going to kofi.com/Toby Haydock and dropping a few pennies into my kitty whenever you see fit, or I sound hungry enough. But just listening to these is support enough, and if you like and subscribe and give a thumbs up and 5 stars on all of the stuff you can do to polish the internet algorithms to get these podcasts more widely seen and distributed, then I will be so grateful. You can find me on social media at Toby Haydock, at Haydock Podcasts. They're both my Twitter handles. I'm on Blue Sky as well. I straddle the political divide like a man of no conviction, and I have convictions. I'm just very needy. I'm on Instagram at toby.haydock. I have a Facebook page, and I have a YouTube channel that I'd love it if you could like and subscribe. I've no idea what the post credits were on the original 4 episodes. I redo them for the omnibuses, which means you do lose the ones that are on the individual episodes. But it's, I don't know, it's this, the collector in me goes, well, I should make this slightly different so that people have to keep them all. I remember a friend of mine once bought a whole Elvis collection box set because he'd got about a 30-second outtake from a session or something that he'd not got, and he'd literally got everything else that was on it. That's how we do it. But that was sober. I did when I was editing this together and removing the bits. I did notice. I did hear me talking about pesto for some reason. I think at the end of episode 3, maybe. Well, actually, here's a little secret. I couldn't cut and paste the individual elements of episode 3 for this release, which I normally do. I go back to the original thing on GarageBand with the original tracks on, and get each track and move them along. Just and I don't know why. Just so that it's built. It's built from scratch again, really. But I couldn't do that with episode 3, so I had to get the broadcast episode 3, which is a stereo track, and just sort of stick it wholesale, and obviously just chop the beginning and the ends off. I can't quite do it as smoothly as I do if I have the individual elements. But I don't know if that makes a difference to the sound. I don't know if episode 3 in this will have sounded different because it was the broadcast file that is then now mixed in with, I don't know if the compatibility matters, because that's stereo and these are lots of individual. Oh no, the music's on stereo on these, but the audio's are mono. I don't really know what I'm doing, but anyway, episode 3 is slightly different, but that's appropriate because actually when I watched The Curse of Fenric originally, it was a parents. I think I might mention this in the podcast. I can't remember. Don't listen to it. I had to go to a parents' evening, and my friend Derek came over and started the recording, and he chopped off the first couple of seconds of the title sequence. I mean, not even that, the first half second of the title sequence. So episode 3 was always slightly sullied for me because I didn't have it quite complete. So it's appropriate that episode 3 is compromised. Let's say that my friend Derek imported the files for me, and that's why it hasn't quite worked as I would have liked it to have done. Anyway, there we go. There's the trivia for this omnibus edition, which, as I record, several years after Allan recorded his bit, then several years after I recorded the individual episodes, because obviously as our mutual colleague and good friend to Allan, I only worked with Tony a couple of times, Tony Slattery, who'd had a resurgence, sadly passed away at the age of 65. Oh gosh, it's very tricky, isn't it? So there we go. Anyway, I have noticed that actually going through the Happy Times and Places and going through my Patreon feed, actually there are some people, 1, 2, 3, 4 people who've been patrons of mine, who've stopped being patrons because they've sadly died, which again is humbling that people. Anyway, oh dear, never mind the Curse of Fenric, the curse of aging, the curse of the passage of time. He says as I'm recording this, we're starting the countdown to Christmas, and I mean we're starting this. It's September. I'm not going to go. Oh no, yeah. I'm recording this in September 2025. Who knows? Allan probably recorded his bit 5 years ago. But anyway, it's not a topical podcast. I mean, it is now because I'll make it topical today. Ricky Hatton has died today. The news has just come through as I record this, which will be history by the time it goes out to the general public. I don't know when the patrons will get this, before Christmas 2025, I think. But we're counting down in Haydock Towers. We're counting down to Christmas 2025 as I record this. So this will date this. I don't mind that. There's something. I've been going through stuff in my house and getting stuff out of boxes and finding stuff that I remember doing or I remember writing and going, that was 12 years ago. And it is quite nice to sort of go, that was then. How strange. Well, so this is me at 14:43 on Sunday, the 14th of September, 2025. And tomorrow I'm going to, I'm setting off now. I'm setting off shortly to go and record a Blu-ray special feature for a forthcoming Blu-ray box set. So that might well be out by the time. This will get released for non-patrons before that comes out, I think. Yeah, it's not. Season 13 is done. As I record this, season 13 is coming out in a couple of 2 or 3 weeks. This is going to be for the box set after season 13, which by the time this goes out, probably not on Patreon, but on non-Patreon, you will know what that is. But I'm having to be evasive in order that I don't leak it to the patrons. Anyway, there we go. So from the 14th of September, 14:44, that's when this post-credits bit was done. That's of no interest to anyone at all, but at least it means it's different from the episodical release, which is what special editions are all about. Yikes.